You're good, Ed.
Thank you. Good morning. This is Assistant Attorney General Ed Hamrick. Today is Thursday, April 13th, and the board has been in a brief executive session this morning and is now back on the record. The discussion in executive session was limited to privileged attorney-client communications regarding the status of the Cagine v. State of Colorado case in San Miguel County, 2021 CV 30013. No board actions were taken in executive session. The board is now ready to proceed with its regular board agenda. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Commissioner Scanlon, real quick. Commissioner Froh, thanks to the wonders of technology, we tend to miss the first syllable or two of things that you say. So you might clear your throat every time you want to speak, or just acknowledge, just know that maybe the first 2 seconds of whatever you want to say might not be heard. So that's all. Thanks.
Okay, and maybe I should just phone in. Maybe that would be better.
Or try going off screen.
Yeah, or
Yeah.
Maybe
Your video.
your video, maybe.
That helps.
Okay, we'll do.
Yeah, seems better. Okay, very good. Thank you all. Again, this is the April. Where are we at? April.
Sorry, Commissioner Scanlon, one more thing. I gotta let the public back in.
Oh, please do. I'm gonna grab a copy real fast.
Well, you let the public in.
Right.
I will go out there.
Would you mind repeating just your piece?
Sure.
The end piece.
Let me know when you're ready.
I'm ready.
You can hear me.
Yep, everybody can hear you. Yep.
Good morning. This is Ed Hamrick, Assistant Attorney General, and I represent the State Board of Land Commissioners. This morning, the board was in a brief executive session to receive a privileged attorney-client communication regarding the update of the status of the Cagine v. State of Colorado litigation in San Miguel County District Court, case number 2021 CV 30013. The discussions were limited to privileged attorney-client communication, and no board action was taken in executive session. The board is now back on the public record and ready to proceed with its public agenda. Thank you very much.
Thank you and welcome everyone. We do have a quorum of commissioners here. We are expecting Commissioner Clark. So we'll let folks online know when she joins. A couple of quick announcements. I think if you have not already heard from our meeting agenda, we have pulled item E, the ground lease, gas-powered electricity generation facility. That has been pulled indefinitely. So we want to acknowledge and thank all the comments that we received and the input that people have given us related to that agenda item. And as I've mentioned, we will not be discussing that today. With that, I also want to let folks know we had a great tour yesterday at Land Board Properties, some of our real estate holdings that we own. And so we're able to do a big loop of the metro area, see some buildings, parking lots, other things that are part of the Land Board's portfolio. And really want to thank Chris for taking us around and Julie for the helpful information that we learned from our staff related to performance and how this fits with our the rest of our work. And want to recognize Kristen. In every building there was a screen telling a bit of the story of the Land Board. So it was a terrific day to spend together. So I just want to thank all the staff who put that trip together for us. All right, with that, I also want to open it up now for public comment for any non-agenda item. Commissioners and for members of the public. We did receive quite a bit of comment online. So that will be entered into the record as part of this meeting discussion and work. So please know that we have received that, the commissioners have reviewed those comments. Is there anyone else who would like to comment from the public again on something, an item not related to anything on today's agenda?
Folks listening online, if you'd like to address the board for a non-agenda item, please use the raise hand feature at this time, and I'll give you a few seconds to do that. No raised hands, Commissioner.
Okay, thanks so much. With that, we'll move on to Director Ryan and any announcements.
No announcements.
All right, well, that was fast. And I know Vanessa is here with our DNR report. Welcome, welcome.
Thank you. Good morning, Commissioners. Vanessa Mazal for the Department of Natural Resources Executive Director's Report today. Good morning. I apologize that last time I was choking up. I found out I had an allergic reaction to something, so that hopefully that won't happen again today.
Everything's fine.
What's that?
Everything's fine.
Everything's fine. Updates from the Executive Director's Office. We are selecting a finalist, I think today, for the tribal liaison position. So that's exciting news. We hope to have that person on board, perhaps even next time that I update you, which would be great. I'll move on quickly to legislative updates because there's quite a few. I wanted to note that, well, the long bill passed yesterday, passed and was made official yesterday, which is
Which one?
The long bill.
Oh,
So we have a budget.
So we've got funding, quite
Thank you.
more funding, which is great news. I think I can't recall if I'd mentioned, but the Species Conservation Trust Fund and water bills also passed. So we're moving right along. One of DNR's priority bills, the stream restoration bill, Senate Bill 270, is scheduled for hearing today, I believe, in the Senate Ag. There's a bit of an uphill battle on that one, but we are hoping that it will come to fruition in the next 25 or 26 days. Let's see, the SB 001, which is the Public-Private Partnership Authority, Collaborative Authority for Housing bill, which does, I know that it also earmarks $2 million, I think, for Dow Junction, as I might have mentioned in the past. That one is, oh gosh, where is that one? It passed the Senate on the third reading, so I didn't take a note as to when it's scheduled to launch.
Starts at House on Wednesday or Thursday
Okay.
next week.
I do have that on my next.
Oh.
There you go. But I think it's Thursday next week. Let's see, and then finally, there's a comprehensive, finally on just this department, there's a comprehensive housing and land use package that was been one of the governor's priority initiatives. It's quite a big deal, would make some adjustments to local zoning regulations.
Some adjustments.
That's a big one. Incentive programs as well as some restrictions. Trying to move toward transit-oriented development and encourage smart growth, but that one is also facing an uphill battle, and it's scheduled it's laid over in committee and scheduled for another hearing on the 18th. In terms of wildlife, the Wild Horse and Burrow Bill, which would establish a new, essentially a new program and a committee that I think it's an independent committee that's somewhat affiliated with the Department of Agriculture, and a new program within agriculture was introduced this past Tuesday and is scheduled for a hearing today. That one is definitely something we're paying very close attention to. And there are a pair of wolf-related bills, one that would solidify funding for the wolf depredation compensation fund, and another one that addresses essentially the conflict or the complicated circumstance of the state having passed this a bill to reintroduce the wolf by the end of this year, and then another complicated situation, which is that the Biden administration is likely to relist this the animal on as a threatened species and Endangered Species Act. So this essentially will allow, if it passes, we'll hold off on wolf reintroduction until there's what we call an experimental population under a 10J rule, which means that there wouldn't, that our rules essentially would be in place, more or less. So those are waiting, they're in past the Senate Ag Committee, and they're waiting on Appropriations Committee hearing. Number of firearms bills are still making their way through. One that did pass both the House and Senate was Senate Bill 169, which increases the minimum age for firearm purchase to 21. On the forestry side of things, I think or rather the land use side of things, Senate Bill 1066, which is the one we've spoken to that addresses public access on properties that are landlocked. That publicly owned properties that are landlocked, allowing public to access those properties. That one passed committee and is waiting for a floor vote or floor hearing rather. The air. There's several climate and air quality related bills too, and a considerable air quality bill that hasn't yet been introduced, but we know is coming, that would increase oil and gas reporting and coordination between the Department of Public Health and Environment and the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission. We are waiting for that one to come up potentially this week. If not next. There's a large carbon management related bill that would establish require the Colorado Energy Office to create a carbon management roadmap on top of our greenhouse gas roadmap and various other roadmaps. That one is also waiting on an appropriations hearing. Let's see, one other to mention, or a couple others on the oil and gas side. One is water conservation and oil and gas operations. It would require reporting of oil and gas water use. That's something that's important for the land board. That passed the House, it's passed the House committee and was also waiting appropriations hearing. And then a large greenhouse gas emission reduction package is, I think, on the Senate floor today. Let's see. Oh, and one other to mention, the mineral property rights, which would changes OGCC's process for entering into forced pooling. That one is also scheduled for a hearing, I believe, in the Senate Ag Committee today. Moving on to programmatic and division updates. You might have heard, we're excited that the new director for Colorado Parks and Wildlife, Jeff Davis, was announced. He's coming to us from the state of Washington. He was the director of conservation for their Fish and Wildlife Department. And he's coming on board imminently if he's not already seated. We're really looking forward to having an established leader there. It's been a year of kind of a little uncertainty. There's several, I'm kind of gonna breeze through the federal planning updates. I just wanted to mention that DNR is going to be the lead agency for the state's representation for a range-wide solar revision to their solar environmental impact statement. So this will essentially update their plan for solar development on federal lands, and that does tend to have a bit of a leading effect on solar development for in other places too. So that's why we pay close attention to it. Water Department, you may have heard that the Bureau of Reclamation issued this week a draft supplemental EIS, which will propose adjusted operating guidelines for Glen Canyon and Hoover Dams. This is as a result of the lower basin states not having come to an agreement on how to essentially deal with address their drought emergency circumstances. The upper basin states are not essentially affected by this, but the proposal right now under this draft EIS is that essentially shortages be shared. Nobody likes it. We'll see what happens. Let's see. And then also I wanted to note that Tracy Kosloff was appointed, who's an internal candidate, was appointed to the position of Deputy Director for the Division of Water Resources last month. And finally, I think I'll move on to that. Let's see. I think that's it. I'm going to pause there and wait for questions. Anybody?
You mentioned carbon something roadmap.
Management.
Carbon management roadmap.
So it's essentially looking at carbon sequestration and storage roadmap.
And was this the bill that was maybe going to establish a regulatory framework for the state to be able to have oversight of that? Or
Yes, I can't recall.
OGCC sort of.
Yeah, let me look back at my notes because I know that I conflated that one and
Right,
the
there are
other
a couple of carbon bills.
I know. Let me just take a look at my notes because I might have
we just want to track those because they help us be in that business.
Right. No, I believe it's, sorry, that's the other one, the greenhouse gas emissions reduction measure. That's the broader emissions package. So that's Senate Bill 16. That would
And
be
that
the
is
Oil and Gas Commission Authority over injection wells. So,
SB 16. Okay.
yeah, sorry.
And then,
Essentially, that establishes state primacy over the federal rules.
got it.
Right.
And the force pulling bill is what number?
Force pooling is 201. Titled Mineral Property Rights.
Got it.
So Senate Ag today.
Thank you.
Yeah.
To be fair, all the states agreed except California.
Oh, right.
I'm still in Arizona.
California is fussy about these things, but you know, they have the most water rights. in The basin, and so they leverage, but this is a big, the draft EIS essentially would do away with the existing compact law of the river that essentially governs according to seniority, senior water rights, and that's why California is really putting a stake up. So we'll see what happens. Paying attention. Any other questions?
You're
That was a
busy.
lot.
Thank you.
That was a
Thanks,
lot.
Vanessa. We appreciate you.
Yes, appreciate it.
28 days left down there, right?
Yeah, you're on the
28 days.
countdown. You're on the countdown. All right, we'll move on to business before the board and information items first. Director Ryan.
Staff report, you all saw this in your books, but I want to highlight a few things that are in there and a few things aren't. First, Lowry, which we wrote about in here. We did our standard offering of a 10-year lease. We got some proposals. We had a robust evaluation group. Nick Trainer was unanimously selected to remain on the lease. He did a fantastic job with his response and his interview. And so we're delighted to keep him. He's been a great partner for the land board. So Nick will be renewing for another 10 years with us. Similarly, the Chico Basin lease comes up, and we've already approved how we're going to handle that. And we've approved the RFP. That RFP is going to go out to the market, I think, on May 7th. Some early May. So you'll start to be hearing on that in the midsummer here. We'll get responses back and vote on that. In the paper last week, some of you saw articles about Arapahoe County and a possible moratorium related to oil and gas. The commission voted not to impose the moratorium. We were tracking that because that was basically our Lowry Minerals lease was caught up in that with Civitas. Despite the fact that they said they're not going to impose a 6-month moratorium, I think Civitas was saying publicly, hey, we weren't going to submit for permits in the next 6 months anyway. So let's sit down and work with you about what the right protective measures are. As a reminder, we've got very robust stewardship requirements in our lease, where they can and can't put pads, what the disturbances can look like. It's a pretty progressive lease for our standards with lots of stewardship stipulations in it. So I'm hopeful that they'll have productive conversations with Arapahoe County and figure out a constructive path forward that obviously generates a lot of revenue for us. And Civitas has drilling requirements under their lease that they need to meet with us. So we were tracking that. Crystal was listening in on the hearings, Crystal and Katie. And lastly, a year ago, we bought Bear Creek Ranch, right? About a year ago. And we said we were going to use that to pilot a 1-year lease rather than our standard 10-year agriculture lease, with the idea that may do different things with the ranching community, allow more flexibility for some lessees. That lease is also, the RFP for that's also going out next month. And we expect to have proposals back shortly and find a lessee for that and begin to sort of track how that's working for us and if that's a model we want to do more of or less of. So did I capture that correctly for you, Les? So a number of items that you all have been hearing about, we just wanted to update, hear an update on how we're doing.
All right,
Any other questions about the written items in here?
Commissioner Frobe's got her hand up, just.
Thank you.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
now?
Yes.
Okay, there is a bit of, I'll acknowledge that. Anyway, related to the oil and gas conversation in Arapahoe, I wondered, since our leases, the state land board has done a really good job incorporating. I wondered if we shared those with the Oil and Gas Commission and others as a standard or as a leases, you know, sort of exemplary. I just wondered if we shared the best practices, as it were, in the larger community for oil and gas leasing.
Thank you, Commissioner Frobe. We did send a letter to the county at their request that explained some of the requirements of our lease and some of the impacts that could occur to the land board if a moratorium were passed. Having said that, there are still parts of this that we did not put out specific standards. We left that to the county, like setbacks from water. I'm sorry, left it kind of NCOGC. County and COGC, who are the regulatory bodies, and we knew that there could be movement in those requirements over the term of our lease, which is held by production. And so as those requirements change, we wanted the regulatory and permitting bodies to also have flexibility, which they would have anyway. That so we didn't get into all of the specific standards that they would do anyway. But I know Crystal and Katie have worked with the county. They're very aware of our lease and its requirements. It just didn't, by design, it didn't deal with some of the things that were being contemplated here. Did we answer your question?
Thank you. I was just, yes, it was even a broader one about if we think we are holding a higher standard in terms of thoughtful, intentional inclusion of, you know, stewardship related provision in our leases broadly, wondering if we have shared that with just generally out with like OGCC, or not so much just even with the Arapahoe County matter, but just in general.
Yeah, this is Greg Okish, Assistant Director. We have shared it broadly with a number of audiences. I think what Bill was touching on that was important. We wrote the lease 12 years ago now, and intentionally set some very high standards for resource protection on our property, and then intentionally continue to rely on the regulations that were being advanced through COGCC in the county, which in some cases have become more strict now than our original ones were, if that makes sense. It's
Yes.
He's piling on what you're saying. I think it's a good document in that it's a living document, and parts of it, we are still sort of setting the bar higher than those regulatory agencies, and in some places they've surpassed us now after 10 years. So it's a bit of both.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful, Greg.
All right, thank you. Any other?
I just wanted to, regarding the water program, thank Justin for helping on information on getting the, you know, how many days were in priority on these shares that we were talking about at the last meeting, and it worked out maybe $8-9 an acre, but was what at the end the farmer is paying, you know, he's leasing for $1,000, I believe, here. And annually, I kind of do a personal survey around the West, the irrigated West, obviously, on what other cost of water. Central Arizona Project Bragg is $65, in Pearl Valley is $20 an acre foot. So as a typical in Colorado, it's the most or the least priced water in the West. My parents came here 30 years ago because the water is so cheap, really. Well, just it's whatever you can really divert and use or divert. So it could be, if it's a dry year, it could triple what it is. But these shares kind of have they're very senior, and it worked out to about $8, $9 an acre foot. And the southeast where we are, where I am, $7-8, about the same. It's a good thing for farmers. It's a bad thing for, in my opinion, for conservation, because the water's so inexpensive like that. And we have prior appropriation. why do we need to make improvements? It's, why do we need to be efficient? The water sheet, that's something for another day.
Thank you. And I do want to note, Commissioner Clark joined us a while back. So we do have all of our land board commissioners with us today or online. All right, Chris, we are to you.
Well, Chris is getting set up. I want to do a brief preface for the board. Assistant Director Greg Okish. As you, I think you know, we have like 10 business programs for which we develop these business plans, which you're about to see, the business plan for real estate. We update them every 5 years, and then they become sort of our roadmap. So there are adjustments along the way, but our roadmap for what we're trying to accomplish in that particular business over the next 5 years. For better or worse, 7 of them are due for updates this year. So you're going to see 1 or 2 a month for the next 6 months. And so we're always interested in whether or not, from your perspective, these documents are helpful and useful. So any feedback you can give us today on this business plan in particular, we could start to incorporate into the next one and the next one and the next one. So please feel free to offer constructive criticism where you feel it's appropriate, and we'll try to address that. And if in not only this plan, but in the next one, use next month will be water. So improving the breed, if you will. So,
Thank you.
And if it's perfect, you can say so.
I think it feels perfect. Yes.
Suggested.
Good morning, Commissioners. I'm Christopher Smith. I'm the Real Estate Sector Manager here at the State Land Board. And so the purpose of this presentation and of the business plan in general is to provide the real estate section and the board with sort of a roadmap for the next 5 years. This item today is an information item only, so we're not requesting board action on this, but I am requesting feedback and would love to take questions and all that either throughout the presentation or at the end of the presentation. So the board manages a portfolio of assets that we've organized into 3 areas that are managed by the real estate section. These are commercial office buildings, vacant developable land, and agricultural land. And I would note that with agricultural land, last year, William did a field operations business plan, which addresses the operations of the agricultural land. The real estate section business plan addresses sort of the asset allocation, or the what we should own and what we should be buying and selling as far as agricultural land goes. So it's a little bit of a nuance there. So the presentation today will consist of 2 parts. The first part is I'd like to talk a little bit more about the commercial office buildings. We saw most of them yesterday, and I'll talk a little bit about the financial aspect of that line of business. And then the second part of the presentation will address other parts of the business plan, give you a sort of a brief introduction to the rest of the business plan, the developable land and agricultural land. Any questions so far? Okay. So some of this will be a little bit of a review of the presentation yesterday. But for the first 120 years of the land board's existence, the board made money for schools primarily through mineral development and agriculture. Minerals makes a lot of money, but it's very cyclical. Agriculture is very stable and provides good stewardship to the land, but does not provide as much money as minerals. So the board in the mid-1990s sort of made an intentional decision to diversify its portfolio, specifically into commercial real estate. And in the mid-1990s, we acquired the Dodge Brothers building, or 1278 Lincoln, which we saw as the second building on our tour yesterday. This is where Westward is. And then in 2000, we acquired 600 Grant. But it wasn't until 2006 that the real estate section was set up. And then between 2000 and 2019, we really acquired sort of the lion's share of the portfolio. We acquired These 4 buildings, all of which we saw yesterday, which make up about 300,000 of the 475,000 square feet that we have today. Today, we currently own 472,000 square feet. We own, roughly 13 buildings or 13 assets, 2 of which are in Parks Trust, or a trust that the beneficiary is Colorado Parks and Wildlife. These are the 2 buildings in Loveland that the board took action to offer for disposal last month. And so they are not on this list. And they're really not included in the financial part of the presentation you'll see. This will be specifically for school trust assets. So we own 8 office buildings, these 2 other office buildings which are in the Parks Trust, an airplane hangar at Centennial Airport, and 2 parking lots, which we saw yesterday. These are all the buildings we saw yesterday in green. So to move on to move on to a little bit of the financial performance of these buildings. The average occupancy over the last 10 years of this portfolio is about 80%. It's actually 81%. And we're currently at 80%, which mirrors the markets in which we operate these buildings today. We've got 80% occupancy portfolio wide. And then we track something called net operating income, or NOI, which is this here. Net operating income is your gross rents plus any other income like parking income, minus your day-to-day operating expenses. So these expenses include taxes, insurance, and then things, snow removal, janitorial, everything sort of, the Excel bill, everything it takes to run the building. Over the last decade, we have grown from about 3 million 10 years ago in net operating income. We hit a high of just under 7 million. This was the year that COVID hit. So we're on a fiscal year of July 1st. So this year includes 9 normal months and 3 COVID months. And then since then, we have sold a couple assets. And so today we're at about 5.75 million in net operating income. The things that net operating income do not include are capital expenditures. These would include a roof, a mechanical system, something that adds value to the building. And it also includes building out space. So tenant improvements, when we sign a lease with a new tenant, we typically will give them an allowance, or we will build out their space to their specs. And then it does not include leasing commissions. The reason that we track net operating income is because this is what the market tracks. This is how the market values buildings. So they'll take a net operating income and divide it by a market capitalization rate to get a value for a building. And so that's why we track it, is to be consistent with the market. But we think that a better metric, or a metric that's probably more relevant to us, is net cash flow. And net cash flow is your gross income and parking and things, minus your day-to-day expenses, minus your capital expenditures. So it's all your income and all your outflows. And so that's a better indicator of our actual cash on cash return. And so our net cash flow, as you can see, this is about $1 million less than the net operating income. Net cash flow also makes the portfolio very, I don't know if it's, because capital expenditures can be very expensive. A roof on a building can be $500,000. So it doesn't really bode well for a line graph. But we think it's a great indicator. And then this is how we look at our performance on a cash on cash return basis. Is we take the value of our investment and we take the net cash flow divided by the value of our investment to get to our cash on cash return. The cash on cash return, think of it like a stock dividend. So it's it's sort of your yearly earnings, but it does not include appreciation of the building. So today we're at about 6.3%. for our cash on cash return. So kind of to sum up the financial part of the portfolio, we have 472,000 square feet. Our net operating income is 5.7, but our net cash flow is about 4.7. Occupancy 80% and cash on cash return is just under 6.3%. So over the last 15 years or so of owning this portfolio, we've learned a handful of lessons. The board purchased this commercial portfolio really for two main reasons. One is to provide diversification to the rest of our portfolios, and two is to kind of boost our overall financial return of all of the land board assets by moving into commercial real estate. Inherently, the level of risk with owning commercial real estate is higher. We're sort of operating. There's volatility in rents coming in. There's volatility in expenses, especially we've seen that in the last 3 years with inflation and with supply constrained market for materials. And so there is a higher level of risk in owning commercial real estate. But I would say that we've made a better return than many of our other lines of business in the land board, but we've made a lower return than our competitors in the private sector. And there's a handful of reasons for this. Most of the reasons for this are because we're a state agency and certain laws and rules apply to us that may not apply to our private sector competitors or peers. And so the first of which is we don't use debt. We're a state agency, so under Tabor we can't use debt. So we buy properties all cash. This lowers the risk of the property, but it also lowers the returns. And to give you an example of how it lowers the returns is you all may be familiar with the concept of leverage. So essentially, if you bought $1 million house and you sold it for and you took a loan out for $800,000 and you sold it for $1.1 million. You would have made a 50% return on your $200,000 down. If you bought that with all cash and you had no loan, you would have made a 10% return on your $1 million cash. So the idea behind leverage is that if you take on debt with properties, you can boost your percentage return. And so that's why our 6.3 is lower than a market rate. Yeah.
What do you think the private side would be if we're 6.3?
Yeah, it would probably be about double that. I mean, I think it would be around 12%. I'll actually ask Matt LaFontaine for a lifeline.
Phone a friend.
I think that's accurate. Looking back when we had a lower interest rate environment, today we're probably more comparable.
Thanks. So the other thing with not using debt, is when we buy properties, we have to, with our NSE funds, we have to sell properties and conglomerate those funds to be able to buy properties. So as you saw yesterday, most of the buildings that we own, we purchased in the $10 to $20 million range. So that kind of puts us below institutional investors, above mom and pop investors. So that to some degree dictated where we were playing in this market. And then lastly, when we sell properties, we do a statutory process, which includes a public bid. And so this is a somewhat cumbersome and lengthy process. We've tried to align it somewhat with the processes that are customary in market, but to some degree, it's a little funky. So another lesson that we've learned is that we use all cash accounting. We don't use GAAP accounting. And so when we do have capital expenditures, they show up in our accounting in the year that they were spent. So when you look at our line graph of our net cash flow and our returns, it does do this, which is why in our business plan readouts, we report out net operating income to sort of show the real sort of growth in rents and expenses. So the other thing is we do not depreciate assets using this accounting. And then we're also subject to all state statutes. So an example of this is that we are required to pay prevailing wages on any projects that we do that are over $500,000. And when we build out space for tenants, if you have a tenant that's more than about 10 or 12,000 square feet, their tenant improvement construction dollars can be more than $500,000. So the requirement to the prevailing wages requirement increases our costs as compared with our competitors. Another example of this is that there's currently a bill going through the legislature that would require all state buildings to have gender neutral restrooms on each floor. And so we've weighed in on that from a fiscal impact. And if that passes, then we would be required to build a third restroom on each floor of each building that we own. We believe the cost of that would be about $1.5 million. So these are things that are only required of the state and not our competitors. So that's one way we're different. Also, we use our own state legal, our own procurement or contracting, our own accounting, our own insurance. And this is very helpful in a lot of ways for the agency as a whole. But the flip side of that is that it's difficult sometimes for us to hire specialists in things. And then we also use our own, we self-insure our properties for hazard insurance. And what we've learned over the last couple of years, especially with the Marshall Fire in Louisville, is that our insurance, our risk management is much slower than the private sector. So while our neighbors had tenants displaced for weeks, we had tenants displaced for months while we were getting our insurance claims settled and getting paid out so we could do the work on the property to get the tenants back into it. So there's some pros and cons to that. And then another one that has pros and cons are we don't pay real estate property taxes. So that certainly lowers our bill. However, our tenants do pay a leasehold interest property tax. And so this is a concept that's it's less tax than they would normally be responsible for. However, it's kind of a difficult concept to negotiate with our tenants, that they'll get a tax bill and they can bring it down to our property management office and we'll pay it and then we'll bill it back. And then the other concept here is if we were to ever sell a building, their tax bill would go up. So it's difficult for us to sort of increase their net rent because they don't know if we're ever going to sell a building. So tenants will. It's sort of a hard conversation to have when you're trying to start a relationship with the tenant when you're trying to get them into your building. So overall, I think what we've learned, one of the biggest lessons we've learned is that being overweight in a single property type has hurt us in the last couple of years. So we got into this business to diversify the landlord portfolio as a whole. But what we found was that we're good at office space. So we bought a bunch of office space and that worked out pretty well for us until about 3 years ago. A black swan event like COVID came along and, we've felt the pain of being not as diversified in this specific line of business. Occupancy, as I mentioned, is 80% market wide, but what we're seeing is that office tenants specifically, as their leases come up, which typical office lease is 3 to 5 years. So we're just now starting to see some, not just now, but we didn't see it all at once in early COVID. We saw as tenants roll over, they expire, they're taking less space or they're moving their operations home or letting their staff work from home, things like that. So we expect that occupancy overall in the office market will continue to decline a little bit. And then at the same time, our operating expenses, as I mentioned, have been going up just due to inflation. So that's another lesson we learned. Based on these lessons learned, we're pursuing 3 general strategies as it relates to our commercial portfolio. Number one is we have some NSE funds currently that we're looking to place. And as we do so, we're looking to diversify our investments. So we're not really looking at office buildings as much anymore. We have followed that market and we still continue to follow it. And if there's, an excellent deal, we may look at it, but I think our overall outlook is that this isn't just a sort of a fad. This work from home isn't just a fad. It's more of a long-term trend. And so we think that there's more room to fall in office. And so we're looking to diversify into other type of assets like industrial warehouses, things like that are doing better. These are also typically triple net leases. So that means that the tenant pays us rent, but they pay their own insurance, their own taxes. They manage their own buildings and pay for their own janitorial and their own snow plowing and things like that. And the landlord would typically only be responsible for the capital improvements like a new roof, something like that. So that would remove our risk a little bit and boost our return. We also have the ability to put NSC funds into the permanent fund if we should choose to do that as well, which could offer diversification in the form of investing in REITs or something like that. So second strategy is that we will work to increase our commercial office returns. And so because we have no debt, we can be competitive on our rates and keep our buildings hopefully at a higher occupancy than the market, be more competitive against our competitors in terms of rates. And then if we start to diversify our portfolio, we would look for a higher overall return of this portfolio. And then the third strategy is to consider whether to strategically dispose of some of the assets that you saw yesterday, and then time those disposals carefully. So we model each one of these assets using a software program called Argus, which is a very powerful sort of Excel type tool, but more powerful. We can model probabilities of tenants staying, and then choose that adventure and say how much vacancy is that going to, when are they going to expire, and do we need to do carpet and paint, or if they're leaving, how much time vacant will we take, and all of that. So as we do that, as we model these properties, it sort of highlights what are good investments that we need to do, right away, and when's a good time to sell these properties. We believe that this, if we start considering disposals, it would not be this calendar year, but probably we've got some work and some stabilizing to do on these, and hopefully during that time, interest rates will start to come down and bring an office market back a little bit, or buyers for an office market. So, so that is the first part of my presentation. That's the commercial part, and I'd love to pause there and take any questions, or we can take them at the end of the overall. So I've got probably 10 more minutes left of presenting.
I think you should just keep going.
So the second part of this presentation, I'd like to talk a little bit about the rest of the business plan, which is Exhibit 1 in your packet under this item. As Assistant Director Okish mentioned, we do these business plans every 5 years. And this one's close to 30 pages, and we sort of, it provides us with the roadmap looking forward. The first business plan we did was about 10 years ago, so we're on our sort of third rendition of this. And so, let's see. So other than commercial, this business plan addresses developable land and agricultural land. So developable land, we currently track our land, we call it our land in the path of development. So these are lands that we have identified using GIS and other things that have services like water, sewer, police, fire, school, things like that you need for development, or are adjacent to those services and could be annexed in. And so we really have 14 priority parcels that are on this list here. These total about 1,000 acres that we're tracking. And then in addition to that, this is a map that shows all of the blue stars, mostly around Denver, but also, Rangeley, Pueblo, those areas. These are properties that are already annexed or incorporated into city boundaries and can currently participate in those services and are closer to development than other parcels. But we also have about 60 other parcels that are these, orange circles here that are adjacent to cities. So you can, if they share a border, you could annex, you could petition to annex into a city and take advantage of those services. Some of these we're actively working on. As you can see here, this property at Dow Junction, it's not annexed into Avon or Vale right now, but it has the ability to annex into either. And so we're working on these properties. So these are our lands that are potentially developable. And going back to this slide here, with these lands, we typically have an interim use, which could be 20-year solar lease, could be a parking lot. You saw with 9th and Grant yesterday, those are parking lots, but we believe that the highest and best use is ultimately going to be development for these. So our section tracks these. We participate in the comprehensive growth plans of cities in which our properties are adjacent to, and we weigh in on those sorts of things. And so these are properties that probably currently have an interim use. And so the strategy for these properties is to put them into an interim use, such as parking or solar or something like that. We may pursue some preliminary entitlements. So we may annex these into cities. We could then zone them or rezone them. We could go as far as preliminarily platting them. We typically don't go that far because the end developer will probably have their own ideas, and the chances of us doing it wrong are higher. So we'll take it as far as we can to add value to the land, and then sort of pass the football, whether through a partnership or a sale or something like that to a developer.
I remember last year, we approved the lease for truck stop in Lyman.
Yeah.
We have like 2,000 acres on I-70 and the 287, maybe, whatever interstate.
Yeah, not.
Is that one of the ones that you're looking at? 'Cause
Yep.
that's, I mean, that's a major truck route and
Yep.
for industrial space.
Yeah, it is. So,
Annexing into Lyman.
yeah, exactly. And then a third strategy that we could pursue is with our NSC funds, we could buy more land in the path to development and sort of land bank. Since we don't pay taxes, we are better and we pay all cash. We can buy land and just hold it. We did that with the 9th and Grant parking lot. We bought that in 2016. That's appreciated probably 50% since we bought it, and it may be getting closer to development these days. So that's sort of a third strategy with our vacant developable land. So moving on to the agricultural lands, as I mentioned, the real estate section does the acquisitions and dispositions, and we work closely with the field operations group. They're oftentimes the one who identify these ranches and things like that, along with Matt LaFontaine. So as you all know, we have 2.8 million acres statewide of agricultural land. We make about 14 million a year off of it. The value of our portfolio, when I did the slide yesterday, it was 2.4 billion, but it's about, at the end of last fiscal year, we valued about 2.4 billion. It's gone up significantly since then. But that gives us 0.6 cash on cash return. We have about a 95% occupancy.
There's a couple of things. This is Greg Overs. There's a couple of things I might spin a little differently on here. Actually, we have 2.6 million acres of land that's leased for agriculture. And the revenue number is going to be the ag number. We have a lot of other uses on this land that it's revenue, oil and gas in particular. We'll talk some more today about carbon sequestration. So this is only the revenue from agricultural operations. Cash on cash return, if you include all these, I actually don't know what it is, but if you throw in recreation, other surface uses is higher than that. I don't know if it's significantly higher, but it's higher than that.
I just want to make sure I'm understanding. So you're saying this is the baseline and then only with that one use, but there are other uses layered on top of the same amount of acreage of land.
Yes, we're not including those revenues. This is only a snapshot of agricultural revenue generated on land leased for agriculture.
Our specific strategies, the specific strategies for operating this land are addressed in the 2022 field operation business plan. And in this current real estate section business plan, we address buying, holding, and selling portfolio strategy. And then I'd like to note that while the cash on cash return on agricultural land is typically lower than other investment types, the appreciation, especially in the last year or two, has been pretty high. So there's a reason we're in this line of business.
And when about, so this is sort of, you know, a little less formal about presentation. We also own this land because we're the landlord. This is the original, in many ways, original endowment of land from the federal government. We made a conscious decision that we intend to continue being a land board among some other state landlords that essentially sold all their land assets. So there's multiple reasons that we will, I anticipate, certainly for the next 5 years, continue to have this significantly large asset class that we need to continue to manage from a purchase and sales standpoint, but also ongoing operations standpoint.
So in the business plan, we developed this chart here, which I thought I'd put up here because it shows the relative production values of land across Colorado. So the darker green is higher value, the lighter green is medium value, and the yellow is lower value. And it's just interesting to see values of land sort of throughout Colorado. So
Well, and it was also intended, this could probably use some refinement, but if you look at the part of the business plan where we included this, it was in a section where we were talking about as we buy and sell, we're overweighted. You could argue we have too much land, and a significant portion of our land holdings are in eastern Colorado. They're susceptible to a lot of the same threats, and they present a lot of the same opportunities. So as we look at dispositions and acquisitions, we may be selling large blocks of land that may have a lower value to buy smaller blocks of land that in theory or practice have a higher value. And so this was intended to illustrate that, because we have talked a lot about selling potentially when opportunities arise, eastern Colorado grazing lands that we have a lot of, and maybe investing in western Colorado high value recreation ranches, which we have much less of.
Or from the other point that I see on the irrigated croplands, like in San Luis Valley, no, potato, vegetables or fruits or I don't know, Colorado, Brighton or Thornton, where they're growing lettuce, I guess, or onions. And those certainly, there's more value and certainly a higher value for mince, probably a double or triple.
Yeah,
Compared to alfalfa or wheat.
yeah, absolutely. That's a great point. And you know, water is, as you know, just a huge component to the value.
Like add a fourth column that says irrigated vegetable crops or something like that to capture that.
The returns are certainly easily double.
So to wrap up, the business plan, sorry, I'm just making a note of that. To wrap up, the business plan has 6 goals, and it addresses each of these goals in chapter 4 of the business plan. But first goal is to focus the commercial portfolio on creditworthy tenants and triple net leases. Second is to utilize ground leases to generate income and to land bank to support development of housing and affordable housing. Third is to increase the value of the land through entitlements, things like that, removing the uncertainty associated with development. Fourth is to potentially purchase land to land bank, like we did with Ninth and Grant. Fifth is to strategically dispose of some of our current commercial assets and you know, invest them into potentially higher earning assets such as industrial. And fourth is to increase the quality and value of the
That says, that should probably say land and buildings.
Yes.
Yeah.
If it doesn't, yeah.
And then the last is to increase the quality and the value of our portfolio of agricultural land. So with that, I would love to have a answer any questions and you're all set.
Mr. Heath.
Thanks for that presentation. As we look at our desired outcomes, I'm wondering in a broader picture, if we might also think about how we could invest in our mission, i.e. the stewardship of the land, by thinking broadly about how we might support agriculture. And believe me, these are vague terms now, but thinking big about some way that we could make lending more available to folks who are working in agriculture or doing something. American Farmland Trust concept is something I've seen used in the past, or in a bigger picture, we could think about our investments in a way that not only increases some revenue opportunities for us, but enhances the mission so that the folks we invest in are also folks who are doing the primary work of what our mission really wants us to preserve. And I want to just invite you to maybe look around and think broadly about what some investment opportunities might be. Should we have some cash that we could use in a way that would allow us to invest more in our mission? And I know I'm sounding really vague here, but I want to be vague because I really want us to think broadly and invite folks who are working with us to think about if we had some cash and we could do something that would invest in our mission, how might we really be change makers in terms of the work we do? And obviously understanding always that we have to increase our resources to support education, but also do it in a way that enhances the folks who are so important to our mission. So I'm going to stop there. And
Commissioner Heath, I would, this is Bill Ryan for the tape. We had a similar discussion, Commissioner Scannell and I, as part of the 1146 working group that addressed the permanent fund. And there were calls from folks in the education community to do impact investing with those dollars. I think that's what you're referring to, is sort of how do you make your money support your mission better or align with your mission better? So how do we do impact investing with the permanent fund as well? I think you're sort of driving at that same point. Is there a way to do that with the portfolio of things that we manage as well, in terms of young farmers and ranchers, or so I think I would put it under the heading of impact investing. And yes, we're going to look at that. I can't tell you anything specific or concrete right now, but
good. I think sometimes when we call it impact investing, it becomes a catch and people get alarmed that we're going off into some wild thing. But I think we have an opportunity right now. We have, the timing is right. And I think we have shown that we're prudent about trying to support our mission. But I think there are some ways to think about this more broadly. And I invite you, I don't come with an agenda on a specific project, but I've seen some interesting things done elsewhere. And I invite us to think right now, as we're considering what we might dispose of, how we could use funds in a little different way. So I'm just going to put that out there.
Commissioner Thompson, I would agree, and I think one of the best ways we can do that is helping our young, or people that want to be in ag, want to be in ranching and farming. And I know we certainly, when there's scoring being done on leases, I believe young ranchers, young farmers get priority, or the 1-year lease we're talking about in Huerfano County. That's a perfect opportunity for a young man or woman to say, oh, yeah, let's see if this works. And there's, it's a 1-year lease, it's not going to change their life. If it works, then maybe they go find their land. I think, in my perspective, that's one way to, if we are intergenerational, we need the young, we all laugh, if somebody wants to get into agriculture, you have to marry into it or inherit it. And there's so little opportunity for young men and women to get in. And if we could, and I know we prioritize or we help where we can, and maybe we can do more of that, and maybe in the irrigated side too.
Yeah.
For those-
I'm not, this is Greg Obish, Assistant Director. I'm not challenging what you're saying, and I'm not trying to parse it too much. I share internally, we talked around the term young,
Yeah.
because in some cases, and Nick Trainer was an example, in his mid to late thirties, Lowry Ranch was the opportunity that let him really secure and grow his operation. And so we've started to substitute the word new.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think we're all aligned around what the goal is. So they may not be in their twenties. I don't know what young is anymore. You know, if I'm looking at
Under
it.
50
Okay.
feels young.
I started farming this.
So I think we're working towards the same goal with that.
So I just want to conclude this by inviting people who might have an idea, even if it feels kind of wild and crazy, to suggest it. We certainly have some ideas here, but there might be others. And let's really think in a creative way about this idea.
Commissioner Frobe has her hand up.
Commissioner Frobe?
Hi, I have a couple of questions, but first, Josie, I always love your thinking, and it seems to me, I've often thought that there is a role for us to play that in fact is enlightened self-interest in this regard, which is investing in businesses or applications or even capital availability that solves problems for agriculture. So to the extent that the problems, whether they're climate related and water, or whether they're infrastructure limitations, but invest or even, slaughterhouses that are smaller, more mobile, or, crop production facilities. I don't know, but there could well be some interesting opportunities where we could use funds, amass some funds to put into areas that would actually grow demand and perhaps margins on our agricultural land while meeting broader, opportunities. So a couple of ideas from that maybe we can share later. So thank you for stimulating that or triggering that conversation. I had a couple of questions, and first of all, I wanted to say thank you. I enjoyed my personal tour with the staff, and want to salute you for a thoughtful business plan, and I particularly appreciated the work you did to try and distill measures of return on the portfolio. That was really useful. I have some higher order questions, which I don't think we need to get into today, but I'd like to pose for the organization, which are not new ones, but go to that overall question of asset allocation objectives over the next 20 years as a trust with a portfolio of assets. Given the objectives that we have, including risk, management, where should our portfolio be in terms of land versus permanent fund assets versus commercial assets, directly owned or other, and establishing some targets of where the organization wants to move intentionally, lightening up an overweight on ag land in increasingly dry South and East Colorado, and putting that in a portfolio of something else. So that is a conversation I think is well within the purview of the board and the commissioners, and is one that would be useful to have connected to this real estate business plan. And so within that, if there is a role for direct investment in real estate, then some of the observations the staff have made, I think, is appropriate, that we're a unique investor. We don't really compete with other market investors, especially institutional ones. However, playing to our strengths, there are opportunities in the market where our ability to ride out market cycles and our ability to have lower carry costs and be able to absorb opportunity cost and risk, is something that we should focus on as we acquire different assets for investment. I think the staff has highlighted some of those areas. I would also observe that real estate's lumpy, the agricultural stream can be lumpy, although smaller proportion, right, with drought relief, et cetera. But a larger portfolio of commercial real estate assets will smooth out the lumpiness. So there is a question here of, do you double down in real estate and move it to, 4 times the size of the current portfolio, as an example of a question? So these are some of the things I'd love for us to think about as we move forward, and then would allow the staff give guidance to, what type of assets would make up a direct real estate ownership component of the portfolio, if in fact that's where everybody wants to go. So that's kind of the higher order question. Generally, I think that the staff has done a great job of identifying things in and around land, although it seems that that's not diversifying, in fact, does play into our strengths as a unique investor. So would love to see us taking a look at that. And I also wonder if there are some strategies where creatively we could, if we have an expressed asset goal for direct owned real estate, if there are interesting strategies like issuing commitments to buy, much like you did with the building that the State Land Board is officed in now, but in a time of high interest rates and capital scarcity, is there a role where we can commit resources out of some of the big sales we have to enable a developer to build something that meets our investment needs, but also mitigates their capital requirements, just as an example of a strategy we might consider. So all to say, I look forward to having some of the big questions discussed around an overall asset allocation. And the other part of that is I would love to see us use the significant opportunity for these large sales that we have, and therefore the availability of cash, to drive those conversations like Bill, you and Commissioner Scanlon have had, to show the opportunity cost of not changing portfolio parameters with the permanent fund, or giving the State Land Board more flexibility in the types of investments it makes. It's an opportunity we should take advantage of because it is a large amount of cash coming into the system. So thanks for giving me a lot of airtime, but those are some of the things I've been thinking about.
Thank you.
Commissioner Heath, Commissioner Froh, we are planning to do sort of an overview of the whole trust in June, and look at exactly the issues you're asking about at a even bigger level. We have this much land, we have this much minerals, we have this much commercial real estate. The permanent fund is invested this way. How do we want to push and pull on the pieces of that portfolio to improve its performance, frankly? At the end of the day, we're fiduciaries for a trust, and we've got to throw off the income to support the beneficiaries. So as we look at somewhere between $4 and $5 billion of assets, how do you allocate that to meet that mission better? And you're right, we do have some upcoming opportunities to push and pull some things, and how do we want to drive those dollars? So I hope you'll be at our June meeting.
Yes.
Oh, no.
Looking forward to it.
Commissioner Clark.
Oh, no. Maybe I will call in if possible. So yes, thank you, Commissioner Clark, and thank you so much to the staff for the tour yesterday, for this presentation, for the business plan itself. So I'm going to say a few things here today, and then also want to ask to have kind of some in-between time with staff in the coming month or so, to both because I want to figure out how to be able to create a similar type of real estate roadmap for my own work and team. I think you guys have set a really good example. But also I'll have some kind of in the weeds questions about kind of the mechanics of that property tax issue and kind of how that can be streamlined. Want to dig into that a little more. Broadly speaking, very much in line with what Commissioner Frobe just shared and Director Ryan in terms of, I always like to think about, we have to build the shelves first and then start adding books to it. And so kind of laying a groundwork and context in our minds for what we're looking at. And so I think critically important is all policy decisions have its trade-offs and consequences. So we're digging into the levers that we can put into the real estate piece itself, but first need to understand, where should this real estate side fit, or kind of these particular assets fit within the money that we see from oil and gas and all of these other things. So want to understand that so that we can have a high level goal of how much should be coming from, where should the overall real estate portfolio fit within all of that. And then we can better fine tune the particular outcomes that we're looking at here to meet that. So I also wanted to just kind of point out a few things. It seems to me, because we always read things at different levels as well. And kind of if your executive summary is kind of what people are going to focus on over and over again, there's a lot of great detail here, but is the desired outcomes, the 6 desired outcomes in terms of kind of the operational thing that we're always looking back to make sure that we are meeting. And so to that end, and this will sound like semantics, but I think the language really matters. We're calling it desired outcomes. But then saying that we're pursuing certain goals. And so I just want to make sure that we're truly talking about outcomes and not inputs in some cases. So for example, goal 1, we say focus the commercial building portfolio on assets with high creditworthy tenants and triple net leases, which is a goal for staff to do, to focus on that. But I would think the true outcome is something where like increasing the amount of high creditworthy tenants and triple net leases within that portfolio, something like that. So just wanted to kind of, to make sure there's consistency across the goals, that it's truly, what is the outcome of this? When we talk about land banking, which I think is critically important and is something that the land board is, not all organizations are set up to be able to do that. But as you see, just even holding the land and having some reasonable cash flow over time, there is a lot of appreciation. And then it's preserving that opportunity for what is going to be a higher and better use in the future, given the market that's changing. So that too would be something where it's really about, I would think the goal is something like, the outcome is something like ensuring long-term reliable cash flow with ground leases, or, something like, what is the, yes, we're doing the ground leases, but why? So just making sure that the why is for first and foremost in how we're expressing what these outcomes are. I'm assuming there's no like hierarchy within these goals 1 through 6.
I don't think so. I think they were just meant to touch in that we had 1 or 2 more appropriate for each of those general categories of asset. Property assets.
So I assumed that. I just wanted to confirm that. So, but in terms of, I'm always supportive of land banking from the metro context, the Denver metro, and just kind of more urban context that I can bring more expertise to than water and agriculture. That's why there are different members here on this board. Is I think I love that you guys always answer questions before I'm getting to them. I'm like, oh, well, we need to understand where we are in the path of development of different things. You're like, here's this map and here's what we've done. So that's always great. Certainly within Denver and surrounding communities, surface parking is a dying land use. Like that's not, it's the focus is to not have that be a thing anymore. And so I think that is, really important to prioritize looking at. I think you're exactly right that will be for development going forward, but then kind of how to approach that and how to balance, generating more money from that, but also especially in infill context, what else can be done that is of public benefit, like affordable housing, like, other services that could be provided in a certain neighborhood, I think is an important factor. And of course, is what the governor's looking at with the public-private partnership office and different things in terms of this is public land and, a different form of stewardship for us, right? Like, how are we stewarding this land in these urban contexts differently from conservation and cattle grazing and different things that we look at in other contexts. One other thing that so two more things I want to talk about. One is the warehouse strategy. I think that is really important. It makes a lot of sense. In urban context, we're kind of zoning our way out of having any industrial areas because the pressure is so strong for housing. And so, but with that being said, commerce doesn't operate without still having warehouse opportunities, industrial opportunities. So, and that is something that we will always need. And so to the extent that the land board is able to diversify part of the commercial side of portfolio in that space, I think makes a lot of sense. What we learned yesterday, kind of looking at the office space, is that yes, that's changing. I feel bullish on the idea that we're never going to not have offices there. We've swung. We were all in the office too much, and then we were all completely out of the office. We're going to swing to a kind of medium place where, I don't think most businesses want to operate entirely without people talking to, being in a physical space, but they're downsized. And so it seems that there's people who are building their own buildings, like they're a big company that's going to have their own thing, or there's those smaller, 2,500 to 3,500 square foot, more boutique spaces. What you were saying is what you're not seeing is anybody that wants to buy a floor, rent a whole floor of something. So, being able to be flexible in that way, but warehouse space will always be needed and is, I think, going to really be a hotter market. My question there is that when we hear about warehouses, a lot of it has been for like marijuana grow houses and other things. So curious if that is, verboten for the land board, or just kind of how, we should probably understand how we feel about that, because that's a market that there would be for that type of use. And then finally, one kind of desired outcome that feels implied is geographic diversity. As we were talking about, we have all these things on the Eastern Plains. We could look at some things on the Western Slope. Just curious if that maybe is something to be called out explicitly in terms of a goal, because that, there's big markets and there's sub-markets, and we want to be able to kind of withstand fluctuations in different things. So maybe there's there's been a whole lot going on on the Front Range and east in terms of oil and gas and other things, but if that should change what's happening in the Western Slope, just want to see kind of where that could be maybe called out more more forcefully.
Yeah, I think I think you're right. That is something that I think we have an eye towards in some ways, and we could call it out in our goals under agricultural land or our strategies under agriculture.
Yeah. Thanks.
Commissioner Heath?
Yeah, just one other thing on our desired outcomes. Chris, when I read goal 3, increasing the value of undeveloped land by removing risk or uncertainty. That just sends huge kind of red flags to me. You can increase the value of all the land we hold by upzoning, and what was really intended there?
Well, so it is sort of entitlement based is what's intended. And I think that in looking at our land, I don't think we feel like we can increase the value of all of our land. I think most of it is at its highest and best use, at an agricultural use. We sort of have identified some of those lands where we feel like there is an opportunity here
I think we can be clear, I think that just to connect there might be, we did use the word priority. We've identified a set of priority properties that this goal is focused on. And
So
It
maybe.
speaks to that down in the strategy piece, that the 14 parcels that
Yeah.
are within municipal boundaries.
I think we can clarify.
Yeah.
Yes.
But we're talking about where appropriate.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
because I think just taken at its word value, you could look at that and say, wow, somebody could really be enterprising and.
Yeah, I see, as I read it now, it's just a one sentence, I see what you're saying.
Yeah, okay. Those are-
Terrific. I'm intrigued by the marijuana warehousing, because that would be a very different tour.
I don't know if the AG wants to. Explain on that, we looked at. I think we're still precluded, I think.
With the changes in the farm bill, that's created a little more flexibility if the land board wants to explore those options.
There's revenue there. I'm
NBA rules, right?
The NBA,
NBA players can.
Oh, yeah.
that should
no.
a great deal of impact on it.
It's a part of the mainstream.
I know someone who builds those and they've made a lot of money.
Mhm.
The
Yeah.
same.
Yeah.
In all seriousness. Okay, any further discussion? Thank you so much. We
Yeah, thank you
appreciate
all for,
yesterday and today and the whole team. Terrific. Let's break for 10 minutes and come back at 1:45, and then we'll finish our agenda. And I think we're going to move a couple of things around on final action items. We'll work on that. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
You've got extra. This all Bronco words. Trying to put things around
I mean, it's great. Everything,
Yes.
That's all right. Finish the public work here on fall next year.
So we'll go with
So
this
let's do that
first.
first.
Okay, I got it.
Katie, you okay if we flip on the pencil for me? You don't have anybody here for your night. Okay. Just try and be respectful of the time. Folks who drove here. So you've got like 10 more minutes.
All right. Thank you, everyone. We are back. We are going to make a little bit of an agenda shift in under final action items. We are moving up F, wind production lease with David to our first topic.
Morning, Commissioners.
Morning.
David Rosenberg, Renewable Energy Leasing Manager with the real estate section. This final action item today is to recommend to the board approval of a wind production lease with Bronco Plains 2 LLC, which is a subsidiary of NextEra Energy Resources. So if the board approves this recommendation today, we will be meeting the state land board's energy goals as well as the state of Colorado's energy goals. And it has the potential to earn up to $2.3 million over the course of the lease. So speaking of energy goals, Colorado has currently 5,198 megawatts of installed wind energy. And the state land board has 302 megawatts of that wind energy on state trust land. Colorado has a goal to be 100% renewable energy by 2040. And the state land board has their renewable energy goal in a strategic plan referred to as 1 FA to increase renewable energy on state trust land. So for the new commissioner's sake, I wanted to go, I know you guys have seen this numerous times, but I wanted to go over our leasing process briefly to just sort of explain how we get from the beginning to the end to the production lease, actual construction. So the first step is our pre-application review. A developer typically comes to us asking they're interested in a particular parcel. We do a high-level review, and barring any concerns or issues there, we then send it through a more thorough review to all of our lines of business manager, including our district manager. And they all provide feedback and input. Barring any issues or concerns there, the project will move forward and we'll give the go-ahead to the developer to submit a planning lease application. And the planning lease application is to give the developer a certain amount of land rights to be able to do their permitting, more specific site plans, and also obtain their PPAs, power purchase agreements, and reply to RFPs, et cetera. They're typically up to 3 years in length, planning leases. And once we receive that planning lease application, we reach out to our agricultural lessees at that point in time to solicit their feedback on the project. Within that 3-year time frame, as long as the developer satisfies a certain list of items that we have in our leases that we want to see before we start negotiating the production lease. Some of those items include site plans, proof that they've gone through the permitting process, consultation with Colorado Parks and Wildlife, for example. Once they've satisfied those things, we then start talking about and negotiating a production lease. Going back to the planning lease, planning leases can be approved by staff unless there's an objection from the agricultural lessee, at which time we bring it to the board to have a discussion and a decision on. All production leases are required to get board approval. And the production lease gives the developer the right to construct and operate an actual facility, whether it's a wind or solar lease project. I have this one circled because that's why we're here today, is to ask the board for approval of a production lease on state trust land. And it's gone through all these previous processes already. So the project that we're talking about is located here in Kit Carson County. And I just want to point out, while I got this map up, I think it's the best map that shows this, but we are part of Bronco Plains 1 project already. That was approved several years ago and it's in production. And that's located down in this area right here. So Bronco Plains 2 is a subsidiary of NextEra. As you guys are familiar with NextEra, they're a pretty big partner of ours, great partner. They know how to bring projects from planning to production. The board currently has 11 wind production leases with NextEra. They have 3 wind planning leases. And then they also have 1 solar production lease and 5 solar planning leases. So the Bronco Plains project specifically includes a total of 32,000 acres of private and the proposed state trust land parcels. It will include, they're proposing to build 72 wind turbines on those acres, and it will produce 201 megawatts of renewable energy. The proposed lease terms for the state land board lease consists of 2 parcels, which equates to 1,280 acres of land, and will include up to 8 turbines, 4 on each of those parcels, which will generate up to 23 megawatts of power capacity. The proposed lease has a 20-year term plus a 12-month construction period. So this map shows the project outline. That's this highlighted yellow line that you see. These are the 2 parcels that we're bringing to you today, and you can see the red dots, which are the turbines, proposed turbines on those lands. There were 2 other parcels in the planning lease originally, but they didn't meet the criteria for putting turbines on those properties for various reasons. This is the same map, just zoomed in a little bit closer. Yeah, the blue dots are all the private land turbine, proposed turbines, and the red dots you see are the state trust land turbines on these two parcels. So if the board approves this lease today, it will have the potential to earn up to $2.3 million over the course of the 20-year lease. That includes one-time payments of approximately $83,000, which will be paid upon execution of the planning lease. And then the additional $2.2 million will be earned over the course of the lease. A couple things I wanted to point out about our lease regarding our revenue is we have a most favored nations clause in our lease, which guarantees that state land board will get the highest production rent that any of the other participants in the project are getting. So we kind of guarantee that we're at least getting that maximum, or if we've negotiated something higher, we'll obviously stick with that. And in this case, I believe our rates are a little higher than the other folks involved. There's an adjustment every 5 years where it's called a rent review, where we'll look at the rent and the current production rent that we're getting that particular 5th year. And we will compare that to the percentage of gross revenue. In this case, year 5 would be 4%, and then years 10 and 15, it would be 5%. And it's another way to check to make sure that we're getting market value. It would be the greater of those two numbers. Back before we went to this production lease rent, we used to collect royalties off of percentage of gross revenue, but we went to this method of trying to collect that up front, hit the market rate on that, and then if we did miss it at all, we'd catch up with that on the 5th, 10th, 15th year. So there were 2 agricultural lessees affected by this lease. The 2 parcels, there's 2 different agricultural lessees. They're both participating in the project and didn't have any objections to the state trust land parcels being in the project. They'll be able to continue to use the property for grazing. Obviously, some disturbance during construction period, but once that's all settled down, they'll continue to be able to utilize the property for their grazing purposes. The total ag leased area will be reduced by up to 2 acres for the turbines, and then up to 4 acres related to roads. This is a picture that kind of gives you an idea of the encumbrance that happens with the turbines. This is the concrete pad around the turbine, and then you can see the access road that goes through. There's generally one access road that cuts through the property to access the turbines. So other considerations, as I mentioned earlier, this project went through our line of business review and it received supportive feedback from everyone from the line of business standpoint. The project will follow local land use regulations and it will follow best management practices identified in the lease. So Bronco Plains 2 has completed 100% of the project design. They've completed their environmental studies and their consultations with CPW, as well as obtaining their Kit Carson County permits. The benefits of the project, kind of an overview or summary, is that it will generate significant revenue for the state trust. It supports the board's goal as well as Colorado's goal, and it's compatible with existing leases. With that, staff recommends the board approve a wind production lease to Bronco Plains Wind 2 LLC that's located on 2 sections of school trust land in Kit Carson County under the terms described in the cover sheet and more specifically described in the board order. And with that, happy to answer any questions. We also have some folks here from NextEra if you have any direct questions that you would like to ask them. And I also have the board order up here that I can pull up. You guys are ready to make a decision.
This Commissioner Chavez, I just have one question regarding, you said 2 parcels didn't meet criteria. Was that our criteria or Bronco Plains?
Bronco Plains. Yeah, they can speak more on that. I don't know the specific.
Out of curiosity,
Yeah.
but
Yeah, no, they were included because they met our criteria. We were hoping to get more turbines on state.
Right,
Absolutely. But I'm not sure if it was not enough wind capacity on those areas or if it was other constraints.
Yeah, so when we're building our site plan, we're coming.
Introduce yourself on the record if you would, please.
Ash Ward from NextEra Energy out of Juno Beach, Florida. So when we're building our site plan, initial site plan for the project, we do a ton of evaluations in our due diligence period. And part of that due diligence is finding land that's more suitable to put wind turbines on. The two in the north that you saw are the most viable for our project. Not saying that the others aren't, but the ones in the north are more viable. Thank you.
Commissioner Frobe has a hand up. I don't.
Yep. Commissioner Fro.
Yes, thank you. Will this project feed into the power pathway that we discussed meetings
I think it's
ago?
related to
Is it, I couldn't tell from the map where it was positioned relative to that power pathway.
Come on back.
Oh,
For the record, Director of Development. So initially, no, but it will be, there's a piece of it that Excel is building that it will be networked in it. So yes, in a few years, but once it goes commercially operational this year, it won't, but there is a future phase of the power pathway, I think in 2025, that'll be completed where it will be connected.
oh, great. Okay, thanks.
Just one other question. With those other two parcels, if somebody if some other company in the future wanted to lease them, could we do that, or are we forbidden because they're around there?
It's a good question. Typically, the parcels that are in the planning lease transfer over to the production lease. NextEra does still have a planning lease on those two parcels. It's not necessarily canceled. So if they decide to release them, then we could lease them to other companies.
But the planning lease will expire by its terms at some point.
Exactly.
It's not an indefinite, it's not indefinite.
Josie, Commissioner Heath.
Yes, your first speaker, I'm sorry, I missed your name, but you talked about looking at the land in terms of its suitability. And I know this is at a different stage, that would have been planning, but can you say more about what you look for in terms of suitability?
Ashmore. Yeah, so suitability, we have a whole team that goes through the analysis.
I guess I'll be more specific to help you answer. Are you talking about suitability for the wind or suitability on the soil?
Both. Both. So we have our environmental specialists here as well, that will go, towards the environmental portion of it. And we also have engineers that look at the soil in terms of putting wind turbines on it. But a large part goes into the wind suitability. And it will determine where you can put the wind turbines so that you capture the most energy.
I think the correct.
Missed you, come on.
I think the correct term is more optimization, right? How do we pull the most value out of this project to make it economic? That when we take it internally, it's going to get improved. So I don't think it was more this land isn't suitable. I think it's more of what was the best combination of what the wind turbines, all 72, that makes the best product that NextEra can get approved to get actually built. So I don't think it's something wrong with the land. It's just as we looked at the whole plan, the whole picture, those parcels didn't make it. And that's common amongst all the landowners, right? They all sign up option agreements, and we, in a standard land agreement, you go from an option to a construction to operating. If you guys have a production to the next part of it, and it's the same with other landowners. They sign up, 6 sections of land, and we go through this optimization and allow us to work through all our work in the field. And then at some point, maybe only 2 sections of land to make it. So it's very common that this is.
Just to give you a framework for it, we had asked staff we're concerned about soil and making sure that we can retain optimal soil for agriculture. And looked at them and this is just for instruction for your company, we are interested in using the least productive soil for wind turbines so that we can maximize agriculture. So just wanted to share with you why that question comes. And I understand that you also need to look where there is wind.
Yeah.
But that was my question. Yes.
Commissioner Frobe has a hand up again.
Commissioner Fro. Thank you, Nick.
Thanks.
She's very.
Thank you. David, I don't know if you addressed this. I don't think I saw it. I understand the business units within the State Land Board have provided supportive feedback. I can't recall the role of CPW and any lease stipulations relative to endangered species or other environmental issues. Can you tell me how that works out?
Brandon Smith, also with NextEra. We have worked with Karen Vulture on all of our projects, and we do an extensive environmental studies. We set back from wetlands. And one of the things that I'm not 100% certain about the parcels, but one of the reasons why we may not have used your parcel is we used all the Colorado raptor nesting setbacks. And so all of our turbine locations are outside of those various setbacks. So that's another reason why we could have stayed away from your individual parcels. So also worked with Fish and Wildlife Service, and they've given us comments. Also took those comments into consideration and followed those comments. So does that answer your question?
Yes, it sounds like your process has you engaging with CPW and the feds as opposed to the State Land Board doing it.
Absolutely. Yeah, we do that on all of our projects. Our projects enter financing through a third party after the fact, and they are actually even more rigorous. They look at all of the recommendations given by Colorado Parks and Wildlife, and if so that we follow those recommendations we follow them.
It's also the right thing to do. Commissioner Probe, I just wanted to add, we do, during our line of business review, we reach out to CPW to get some initial input from them. And a lot of times there may be items that become stipulations with the planning lease that we sort of point towards that they need to look at. NextEra indicated they look at this stuff anyway. We just sort of added in there the special concerns that we may have. So we do that, and then also as a requirement of the planning lease, we have a requirement where they consult with CPW and provide reports of the results of that conversation. If we didn't do that, they still obviously do that as well, but it's sort of part of our standard practice as well.
Great, thank you. That's helpful.
Thank you. I think it's good NextEra brought the crew.
Yeah.
Appreciate your time with us. Any other questions or comments from commissioners? Any final comments, David? Okay, we will need a motion. Oh, no, I want to see if there's other public comment.
Folks online listening
Most of the
along,
room is staff or NextEra, so I think we're good here, online.
and same with online.
Okay. Okay.
So if you're online listening and you wanted to address the commissioners with this item, use the raise hand feature for a count of 10. No raised hands, Commissioner.
Okay. All right, then we do have a board order. Yes.
May I ask a question? So the board order on our screen has more to it than what's in our packet. So.
Yeah.
I think the board order might have been missing this last.
Correct.
Which is sort of standard language in our board orders, so apologize for that. This captures that.
Okay. All right. Is that good? Do we have someone who would like to make a motion?
As this Commissioner Chavez, I move we approve the wind production lease. APP is that application 7972 with Bronco Plains 2 as described on the visual.
Very nicely done. We have a motion from Chavez.
Second,
Commissioner Clark. Let's call a vote. Commissioner Heath.
Aye.
Commissioner Clark.
aye.
Commissioner Chavez.
Yes.
Commissioner Probe.
Yes. Yes.
And the chair votes yes, that passes 5-0. Thanks much. And I do appreciate all the NextEra folks joining us. Thanks for your time. All right, we're going to go backwards in our agenda to A with Katie. Oil and gas lease auction of May.
I've asked, this is Greg Otis, Assistant Director, I asked Chris Stoll to give you a little overview. There were some questions in the cards that you wrote out yesterday regarding why it appeared we fattened your package by including contract multiple times. So that's a contract. Stoll will explain what that's all about.
Crystal Crandon, Minerals Director, and yes, I'm sorry that we linked into the package a little bit. I'll try to give you a few minute rundown. So originally staff issued a long-term non-development agreement on a property, which means you can't develop for oil and gas or minerals. And that was back in 2002 when the main technology available to access minerals was vertical drilling. So surface owners would want these contracts to make sure we weren't going to put a rig or a well on their surface. Then fast forward 20 years from now, we're doing horizontal drilling and we can access a mile underground oil and gas resources from an offsite location. But these contracts prevent us from doing that because we had said that we would do no mineral development of any kind. So when I saw that this tract was in the path of development back in 2017, I decided to reach out to the owner of this long-term non-development agreement, see if they would be willing to convert it to a no surface occupancy, which would provide the same protections. But found out that it was zoned to be commercially developed and had been split to 10 plus different landowners. And the contract ran with the land. So then I had to track down all of the different landowners and ask, hey, do you guys want to switch this contract you've already paid for to something that helps the land board make money for school children? And since 2017, I have been working to get all of these landowners to agree to do that switch. And one of the attorneys wrote this amendment and they said, we will do it, but we want this, we're going to do an amendment to the long-term non-development to allow for your oil and gas drilling, but I want to put an addendum on your oil and gas lease that makes us as a surface owner a party to the lease. So we can be in talks with the oil and gas lessee if we need. And so I had agreed to that. So all of those addendums you saw were basically with the current surface owners, and it will be attached to the oil and gas lease when we auction it to make them all basically parties to the oil and gas lease agreement.
Will they get any revenue from that or?
No,
Just,
no revenue, just, I think they wanted it for like notification purposes. And in this instance, the pad that they're looking to do is like 2.5 miles from the surface. So they already have a pad set. I think they'll be pretty good being protected on the surface. That is.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
Yep.
Katie.
All right, good morning. For the record, Keith Stitt, Oil and Gas Leasing Manager, and I'm presenting the standard list for consideration for the May 2023 oil and gas lease auction. And kind of touching base back with what Crystal just told you. This list I'm kind of excited to bring in front of you because of the parcel in Adams County. It's been of interest for some time for development, and staff has been working on it for such a long time to make it available for oil and gas leasing. So the ability for that parcel to be listed on an auction list is due to a culmination of many hours of work from staff, basically Crystal and the AG's office. So Aaron O'Connell's been working on it, but it also includes several of his predecessors. So it's been a lot of staff time in this. I was out yesterday, so I don't think we communicated amongst ourselves very well, but this is basically a recap slide of everything Crystal just told you. But the LT lease is a predecessor to our no surface occupancy agreement. The goal behind the LT lease and the NSO is that it preserves the surface estate so that oil and gas development can't occur on that location. So they have to find somewhere else to put their pad. This particular LT lease was issued in 2003. Crystal kind of went through the history. They had to go through and find all of these various surface owners to get the amendments to the LT lease agreed to. So there were 10 different amendments done. That's everything that's in your packet. But Crystal didn't mention, but I do want to bring this up. The improvements in drilling technology is why we developed an NSO, which preserved the surface estate but allowed for mineral development. Because of that, we no longer issue LP leases. So this isn't an issue on newer agreements with surface owners to preserve their surface rights. So in addition to that Adams County parcel, we have 9 additional tracts that represent about 5,400 acres for your consideration today. The tracts are the reddish orange squares, which are still not big enough on this projector, so I apologize. They're located in Adams County, Cheyenne, Jackson, Washington, and Weld County. Just a little bit of background on these. I did touch on it in the cover sheet, but the tracts in Weld County and in Jackson County have been leased as recently as last November. There's active operators working in those areas to bring parcels to production. So we think that there's going to be some interest in these parcels. The tracts in Cheyenne and Washington County are a lot more exploratory at this point. Historically, those areas have all had oil and gas development, but the current conversations about development in these areas are regarding helium exploration. So there hasn't been a helium well drilled out there. They have historic logs that show helium in those wells areas, but nothing new specific for that. So this is a lot more exploratory in nature right now. These tracts would be offered at the 20% royalty rate. That's the board's current royalty rate. The auction opens May 11th, which is a Thursday, ends the following Thursday. If you're ever interested, launch the morning of the 18th, because that's when everything happens. We did review all of these tracts per policy and reached out with CPW, did our natural heritage program review. And we developed the stipulations that were in your board packet on Exhibit 2. All of these stipulations are consistent with stipulations the board has seen in the past. They're been updated to reflect CPW's current recommendations for timing restrictions or surface, total surface disturbance within the areas. But there is the larger stipulation related to that LT lease in Adams County. So if you had any other questions about that, I'd be happy to talk to you guys about that stipulation.
Mr. Heath?
I have a general question. What's the greatest distance that they can do underground?
In Colorado right now, the longest horizontal well is a little over 2 miles.
And so that's regulated?
Well, yes, and also it's dependent on technology and geology. There are horizontal wells in North Dakota that are up to 4 miles long now. There are operators that are proposing longer horizontal development in Colorado. It all has to go through the same review at the Oil and Gas Commission, which is done outside of our purview. But I would say generally speaking, the technology is evolving to allow longer horizontal wells, which will allow surface development further away from parcels. So just to add, in addition to the 10 tracts that I'm asking the board to approve for leasing in May, there will be an additional 9 tracts that were approved by the board in January that were listed in February that didn't sell. There's a variety of reasons that sometimes that happens. I happen to know that one operator got their dates mixed up and called me in a panic afterwards to find out what had happened. So I do think there are interest in these parcels. But the 9 parcels that are in Huerfano and Los Angeles County down in the south east part of the state. Those will be offered per our board policy a second time at an 18.75% royalty rate. But they'll have all the same stipulations on them that were approved by the board in January. So with that, staff is recommending that the board approve the standard list for auction and lease, which consists of the 10 tracts covering 5,400 acres, including the stipulations in Exhibit 2. I'll be happy to take any other questions.
Thank you, Katie. Any questions, comments from commissioners? I don't see any. All right, we'll take any public comment. Don't think there's any in the room, but Nick, if there's any online.
Folks listening along, please use the raise hand feature. And just double checking, Commissioner Frobe, did you want to say anything?
No, I don't have any questions. Thank you.
Thanks. Commissioner Scanlon, we're ready.
Okay, we will need a motion.
I move the adoption of oil and gas lease auction for May 2023 standard list in as contained in our board packet and delegating the authority to the director to take appropriate action consistent with the board's decision. And again,
Thank you, Commissioner Heath. Is there a second?
Second.
Second, Commissioner Clark. We'll call a vote. Commissioner Heath,
aye.
Commissioner Chavez,
Yes.
Commissioner Clark,
Aye.
Commissioner Frobe.
Yes. Yes.
The chair votes yes. Passes 5-0. Thanks again, Katie. Appreciate it.
Madam Chair.
Yes,
I need to excuse me for a few minutes.
that's just fine. We'll just keep moving on. We have Lindsay next. We're on item B, stewardship trust policy review.
Good morning, Commissioners. For the record, Lindsay Grant, Stewardship Trust Manager. I do not have a slide presentation for you today, since we are simply talking about a policy review. Not a lot to say about this policy revision. I think it did kind of two major things. The first of these is that we did some kind of reorganizing of our criteria section, and we added some language to that just to make our policy a little bit more closely aligned with the language of the Constitution and of statute. It did not inherently change anything in terms of really how we do things. It just sort of kind of reflected, Ed suggested we have a better reflection of what statute in the Constitution directs us to do in our policy. So that was kind of the first change in part one. The other sort of four bigger changes that we made are really things that we changed to really align the language of the policy with our standard practice. There's a handful of things that staff has been doing that we felt were important for good transparency of government, good communication with our lessees and our stakeholders, but they weren't really reflected in policy. And these are sort of things that were a little bit more than what was required in policy. And we thought it was good that we should just continue to do those. And so they should be reflected in policy. So the other four changes kind of highlighted in the cover sheet are things that really kind of just helped with that process and providing some additional clarity to staff and future staff for sort of how we are managing things. That's really all I have to highlight for you, but I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
It's so weird not to have a presentation.
I know.
I'm just letting you know, I'm adjusting for just listening. Yeah,
We could pause and go.
and run and put some slides together of beautiful
If
places.
it can get to my folder on the shelf, I have my pretty pictures folder. I'm just put it on.
I appreciate that.
Scroll.
I do. I appreciate it. Any questions or comments from commissioners?
Commissioner, I just want to add that Lindsay's doing this. Commissioner Probe, I think you're aware of this, but we have a policy manual that sort of governs how staff behaves and what it does with the various lines of business and what our objectives are with various lines of business. And we review and update that every 3 years to make sure that the scope of work and the accountability all support the objective. And to the extent we've learned things in the intervening 3 years that require change to policy, this is an opportunity for us to make sure these are front and center and present and accurate. And so these aren't just things that sit on shelves. It's part of our triannual review. And I'm not sure you've seen one of these, well, you probably have, but
Last month.
just wanted to point that out for our record.
Yeah, Wilbur did the weed,
Yeah.
noxious weed policy. And actually, this policy was really due to be sort of reviewed and updated last October. But we intentionally postponed it because, we were working on that huge change to the stewardship trust with our Bohart and Lahara transactions. And we decided it maybe wasn't the best idea to
do a bunch of changes to the policy right before a huge change to the stewardship trust. Just in terms of like, you know, it maybe could give somebody the impression that we were trying to change a bunch of rules right before we made a
Right.
change to the stewardship trust, which really was not what went into this at all, but we just were thoughtful about that.
Yeah.
So we delayed it.
I appreciate that too. I
Yes, it
don't
all-
see.
all makes sense to me.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Pro. And thanks for your work on this. And unrelated, but kind of related, we did receive a nice online comment from a coalition of conservation organizations recognizing the hard work that you did in our recent work with the Stewardship Trust and agreeing with us, which is nice to hear too.
Nice.
So I much appreciate for everything you do. With that, we will need to take a vote on this policy. I don't see anyone here for public comment, but we should open up online, Nick.
And folks online, if you'd like to make a comment on this agenda item, please use your raise hands feature. I'm curious what song you all sing in your head to get to 10 seconds.
The Jeopardy thing. It's gotta be the Jeopardy thing.
Obviously, obviously.
No raised hands.
Okay, and I'll note Commissioner Clark had to step out of the room, but we still have a quorum with our 4 commissioners, so if we could have a motion.
Perhaps should have asked this as a question, so I'm gonna.
It's not too late. It's
All
not
right.
too late.
So why did we remove beauty? Providing views of or in close proximity to land that was exceptional or had on.
Sure. Yeah, so beauty was originally listed as the 3rd item in the policy, and we actually moved it up to the 1st item in the
Oh, well, I
criteria
missed that.
section. It jumps over a page there.
I see it. I see it.
And that was simply because the order in which they were listed in the Constitution, we decided to list them in the same order.
My apologies, I missed that. Okay.
All good.
I'm prepared to offer a motion.
Okay.
This is
I'll
my-
Please do.
Yes. Okay, oops, now I looked at that, I missed my motion. I move approval of the motion as approved in our board packet, and let me find the number on it. Okay, he's got it. Public review on the Stewardship Trust 400-001 and delegating the authority to the director to take appropriate action consistent with the board's decision. Apologies.
Thank you. Motion Commissioner Heath, second Commissioner Chavez. Let's call a vote. Commissioner Heath,
Aye.
Commissioner Chavez.
Yes.
Commissioner Fro,
Yes? Yes?
and the chair votes yes, that passes 4-0. Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate you again, Lindsay. All right, we're going to move on to Ben with a conversation, our carbon sequestration and storage policy.
All right, good morning, commissioners. I believe it is still morning. For the record, Ben Teschner, the Solid Minerals Manager. And as I've said many times, and I've said it once, I've said it 1,000 times, our minerals group is broken into oil and gas and everything else that smells like geology, and I'm the everything else that smells like geology guy. And so this carbon sequestration, particularly geologic carbon sequestration, falls into that bucket. So I'm really excited to bring this to you today because this is really an emerging business line. Oops. An emerging business line for the state land board. And the reason it's coming to you today is because we have seen as staff, we're getting a lot more phone calls and even a lot more than phone calls, a lot of interest in geologic carbon sequestration, in large part because the federal tax credits for conducting this type of work were increased in the recent the Inflation Reduction Act signed by President Biden right here. But interestingly, this original tax credit called 45Q was originally created in 2008 and signed by President Bush. So this is something that has sort of been growing over the last couple decades. And now we're really starting to see this come to fruition. So let's talk about what carbon sequestration is before we think about making a policy for it. And really the big idea here is that as we recognize that carbon emissions are an important part of the climate change issue, that it's in our best interest as a global society to be reducing those carbon emissions, and then as part of that, taking carbon emissions that either are coming off of infrastructure of some type or even directly out of the air and putting them into some non-atmospheric state, right? And so this falls loosely into two categories where we have these nature-based carbon sequestration ideas, like, this is forestry projects, improving grazing, and there's some stuff with ponds and bacteria where these biological systems end up sequestering carbon from the atmosphere. And currently those things live in our grazing and ecosystem services policies. So what you're going to see today is a policy that is specifically for geologic carbon sequestration. And this is where we take carbon emissions typically off of some industrial source, capture them, and then inject them underground for permanent storage. And there's a number of places you can put these things, deep depleted oil and gas fields, old coal mines, deep saline aquifers, things of this nature. And so you can kind of think about this a little bit like oil and gas in reverse, right? So, if we're putting a well in the ground and pumping oil and gas that's been sitting there for however many thousands or millions of years, right? We're just taking carbon and doing the same thing going the other way. And so this we're managing in the minerals space because, as I said before, it sort of smells like geology, and a lot of it is geology. But there's a big asterisk to this idea that this is a minerals concept, and that is that legally this is a pore space. The space that we are putting the carbon material into the ground is considered part of the surface estate. Right, so that's an important piece of kind of legal space that we're working with here. In addition to this kind of leasing landscape, we're thinking about this as something similar in a sense to oil and gas, that where we have a relatively small surface expression based on compared to the wider leasing area, right? We're leasing a subsurface space, even though as I said before, this is part of the surface estate in legal terms. Staff widely believe that this is compatible with almost all surface uses, again, because of that relatively small surface expression where we have a drilled well pad of a handful of acres, maybe 3 to 10, something in that range, that doesn't take up very much space, and most of the actual activity is going on in the subsurface. But another reason we're managing this in the minerals department is that we do think that this activity may be incompatible with some mineral uses, particularly oil and gas that is being developed from near or especially below your target formation where you're going to put this carbon, right? The idea being, if we're sequestering this permanently, right, out of the atmosphere, that there may be reasons why we wouldn't want to drill through that to access resources below it, or even drill within close proximity to it. So this is another reason why having it in the minerals team makes a certain amount of sense. So what I'm bringing to you today is, as that part of this policy, is a request to give staff the ability to sign exploration leases for carbon sequestration. And this is consistent with our other mining, mineral, and mineral, or certainly our mining policy, and sort of somewhat analogous to planning leases in spaces like renewables. And so these exploration leases would give an operator the right to do seismic and geophysics studies on a property to determine whether, try to understand the geology better. It would give them a right to drill test holes, right, and pull up core and samples of the subsurface. And begin permitting and site modeling to determine whether this property is appropriate for this use. Importantly, what the exploration leasing does not allow would be actual injection of CO2, right? And so you would see similar to these other business lines, should we get to a point where we determine this property is suitable for this use, you would see that as the board again, and with a lot more information about the property and what would be taking place there based on this study work that had been done under the exploration lease. So the bulk of this policy at the moment is asking to delegate to staff that staff be allowed to sign these exploration leases.
Right.
Yeah.
Sorry, I just want to put an exclamation point on something because we're a little inconsistent in the slide. So broadly, as Ben mentioned at the beginning, we are exploring carbon sequestration as a business opportunity broadly and nature-based in this area. The policy for me today is the geologic carbon exploration sequestration policy.
Correct.
And it's very narrow because we don't really know enough about the business yet to ask you to approve a broad policy. So just put an exclamation point on this next to telling you we're intentionally narrow and we're intentionally limiting this, even though this is carbon sequestration. I believe the title on your policy is actually geologic carbon sequestration. That's the narrow space we're talking about. Correct.
And I would even add on to that, I think we have some understanding of things like lease rates and things like that often appear in other policies more concretely. Here, we don't fully understand that market yet. So we're asking for some very specific things. And I would expect in the next few years, we would probably end up fleshing out this policy in greater detail as we get a better understanding of what we're doing. So just as a kind of refresh your memory here, back in January, we brought one of these exploration leases to the board and asked for approval for an exploration lease in Washington County. So this is a lease that currently exists and an opportunity that we're trying to duplicate as staff. So that was on about approximately 10,000 acres, and we're seeing as staff similar interest from other parties, and hoping we can, if you approve this policy, that we can begin acting on those opportunities fairly quickly and be able to get a lot more information about this business line and these properties where this seems to be attractive. And just to get further refresh your memory, that was something you approved back in January 2020. So the highlights of the policy are this. Staff may issue geologic carbon exploration leases for up to 4 consecutive years. A minimum rental rate of $12 per acre per year. And then that the board would approve any carbon sequestration injection leases or easements that come from that, from any of this exploration work. Further, program and district managers will review all of these applications, and that will be something we consider when we're putting together these leases and whether it's something we want to do. This is consistent with all of our other business lines. Staff may also engage with regulators to protect trust assets, excuse me. Staff hold no assets. Protect the trust assets related to this. And this is, again, because this is a really nascent stage idea or a nascent stage industry. And our regulators like the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission, the EPA, and others are beginning to think about how we're going to regulate this. And maybe some of those decisions may affect the trust. Staff may approve surface use authorizations. So similar to oil and gas, we are anticipating that we will lease a parcel for this use. And then when the operator is ready or has enough information to say, I want to do
this particular activity, I want to shoot a seismic shoot, I want to put a well pad in this particular location, that we would then, as staff, go out and approve that use as a secondary process. And that's important because it allows us to, work directly with the operator and other users and make sure that we're citing these things in places that make sense for everybody involved. And then finally, this directs staff to reserve pore space when we do disposals of property. And the idea here is that, as I said before, this pore space is typically considered part of the surface estate, but we would like to preserve the ability to do carbon storage even on these properties that we dispose of, because we think there's a lot of analogy here with the real estate. In addition to what I just described and what you see in your packet, a little oversight by staff here when I put this together. We think it's also important that this align with other policies and that we add point 2D to the policy as you see in your board packet, that staff will communicate impacts of these projects to surface lessees prior to surface disturbance. Again, this is something you see in solid minerals and other places. So we want to make sure that's in there as well. So should you approve this policy, this is what we're aiming to do next. Finalize an exploration lease template. This is almost there. And should you approve it, we're ready to work with our AG's office to get this finalized and then hopefully get this out the door and start signing some of these exploration leases, particularly in the Pueblo and Colorado Springs area, where we're seeing a lot of interest in carbon storage leasing. There's a number of large carbon emitters down there, and we're a large landowner with large contiguous blocks of property, which seem to be quite important for this use. And then in hopefully the near future, bring to the board some carbon injection leases that we feel like we understand well and can present to you so you can make a very informed decision about whether we move ahead with this type of work. So staff is recommending that the board approve geologic carbon sequestration policy 300-011, giving staff the authority to issue geologic carbon sequestration exploration leases and conduct other routine tasks related to this emerging business line. And you'll see the board order that appears on your screen is slightly different than the one in your board packet, because I have added with the addition of point 2D as presented in the meeting.
Mr. Heath?
Yes, Ben, in your memo, you mentioned that we're not recommending any lease terms or royalty rates right now.
Correct.
And say more about that. I mean, does that seem consistent with what other states are doing in this?
Yeah, so this is a good question. We've done a lot of research on what we think this, frankly, what we think this is worth. And there is a very wide range of, first off, there are other states that are leasing for geologic carbon storage, other state land boards at this moment. And there is a very wide range of how they are going to be compensated for that. As staff, we think it's really important that we understand that market and make sure that we are getting the top end of what we think the market can support here in Colorado. We're learning that there are a lot of factors that affect what that market is, proximity to emitters, the geology, the size of the property that you're leasing.
Public subsidy.
Public subsidy is huge. These projects are driven almost exclusively by federal tax credits, to a lesser extent state tax credits, and not just the credits, but often grants from folks like DOE to actually get these projects off the ground. So there are a number of really big factors like that would affect the value that we receive as the land board for the use of our property. So in addition to that work, we hired a consultancy, Creek Bank Consultants, to help us understand this market as well. And they gave us some really valuable information about this. And we're now taking that information and engaging with potential operators. And hopefully we'll have some information, as we kind of narrow in on, what we think this is worth. We'll be able to bring that to you in the future, hopefully in the context of a real lease that we're ready to execute. So does that answer your question?
Well, but it's your intention to establish royalty or lease rates, you just don't feel comfortable.
Yes. Well,
Not necessarily.
I think Director Ryan is dying. Dying to
I
say
want
something.
to, Commissioner, this is Bill Ryan. I want to make sure you understand the distinction we're making here in the policy. This is going to be a two-step leasing process, like so many of our other
Right.
businesses. So Ben's asking for approval today to issue sort of the plan, we call it a planning lease in some lines of business.
Yeah.
He calls it an exploration lease here. But for the actual production lease, we just don't know enough about how that market's going to price out to recommend our own pricing structure. And nobody's asked us for one of those leases yet. We're not ready there. And so when we're ready with to begin injecting that stuff, we need to come back with a policy and with a form of a lease.
Well, yes and no. And I think your question was, do we anticipate in the future, will we put lease rates in policy? And I think the answer is no.
No,
Because if you look at the policy that we drafted today, did you see that we included a whole list of sort of variables that then.
okay, yeah.
Each one, I think, I believe will be custom negotiated based on what kind of emitter. Where's our land? How far away is it? What's the
Right.
bulk subsidy? What's the cost of capture? So I don't expect we will ever be able to say there's a one side, like oil and gas, it's a 20%. There's a one size all fits solution. I think these will each be custom negotiated. So I agree.
And I see Commissioner Probe has her hand up. Unless there's.
Did we answer your question?
Yeah.
Commissioner?
I defer to Commissioner Frobe. And then I want to ask a second question later.
Okay, Commissioner Probe, is this related to Josie's question, or do you have a different question for us?
No, it's not related to Josie's, so I can wait if Josie wants to follow that line of questioning further.
Okay.
So let me just understand, in the future, you plan to put some royalty or leasing rates?
So, so in the future, first off, anything
Here's
that
my
involves.
How do we make money on this?
Great.
And Ed Hamrick wants to jump in too. This is
Well, I think.
very active
I
conversation.
think now that we've clarified Commissioner Heath's questions, I think Ben will be able to answer
Okay,
quite adequately.
very good.
So I'll give this an almost certainly, right, because we have not actually gotten to there yet, but based on the information we received from our consultant and sort of staff's own market research, we're anticipating a lease structure that has some rental rate. So cost per acre per year, as most of our leases have, and then a fee and or percent, it's not really clear which, per ton injected into the ground. So we would receive an annual, let's say for here it's $12 an acre, as an example, plus some amount of dollars per ton that goes to actually gets injected.
Yes, bring you a lease, it will say, this is how we're gonna be paid. We just don't know how much.
Okay, right, exactly.
And we don't want to, as Ben or Greg both said, we don't want to commit to a one size fits all rate.
Right.
Because different deals will have different amounts of tax credits and subsidies and the characteristics of our land and how we're involved will be different. And so Ben's going to go get as much as he can get on every one.
Right. There could also be bonuses associated with this as well, like we have with oil and gas and some mining projects. So there's, I think we're modeling it loosely after a minerals-ish type of lease, again, accepting the market environment that this lives in at the moment. But I guess the other thing to put out there is this is a market that is also rapidly changing. The tax credit, the 45Q tax credit, which is the primary driver for this, somewhat suddenly went from $50 per ton injected to $85 a ton injected with the stroke of President Biden's pen. So, it's depending on what other states, including Colorado, and the federal government decide to do with respect to carbon policies. These things could increase or decrease in the future. We may also see markets that are currently sort of are voluntary for carbon sequestration. So many companies that are claiming to be carbon neutral are actually purchasing carbon credits on voluntary markets, right? So this is something that we anticipate growing in value, and so there may be additional value to sequestering a ton of carbon from sources like that. So these are all things we're considering as we're thinking about what the pricing should be, how it should inflate or track over the course of however long these leases last, things like that. These are all really appear in greater detail and specificity when we actually have one that we're ready to do.
Good. And just a quick second part of that, on your illustration, you show it going down into an aquifer.
Yeah, I struggle with the term aquifer because technically that means it's rock that has water in it. That doesn't necessarily mean it's drinkable. And in this case, it's quite important that it's not drinkable, actually. And there's really two criteria for that. The main one in this case being depth. So we're looking at, your typical water wells are tens to maybe hundreds-ish, low hundreds feet deep, right? We're looking at depths here of many thousands. And that depth is really quite key because in order to, we think of CO2 as a gas that's floating around in the air, and it is. When we're transporting and sequestering it in these conditions, we're actually turning it into a liquid. We're compressing it so much that it's in its liquid state, and we want it to stay that way. It's quite helpful that it's a liquid for this particular process. And in order for it to stay a liquid, we need to put it under enough geologic pressure that it needs to be down in that 3,500, 4,000, 5,000 and deeper kind of space, right? We're realistically not putting water wells down there. The second piece is that water, in particular these deep formations, tends to have other things in it that make it not acceptable for drinking or crops or whatever. Usually salts that are just make it unusable for those things. So. And also something that's considered in the permitting process as they go through this. I believe it's the Safe Drinking Water Act that protects water aquifers. And
Ed, did you have a comment to this point, and then I'll circle back to Commissioner?
Well, I just want to clarify a little bit about what the board is doing with this policy, which is delegating to staff the authority to enter into a very limited concept of an exploration lease without having to bring those individual leases to the board for approval. And the policy sets out the minimum requirements for that particular lease, including the $12 per acre compensation for while the exploration is going on. And that if a project that starts in an exploration stage progresses to an injection or production stage, those economics will be fleshed out for those individual leases. And this policy doesn't delegate to staff the ability to enter into those injection leases. So those economics of those individual projects will be presented to the board for consideration to determine, for the board's determination of whether the proposed economics justify the project from a landowner perspective. And all that will happen in the future and be detailed when, for each of those projects, we know what the project entails and what the actual compensation that's being proposed on it. So there's never going to be a stage where there's injection without compensation to the board, and the board will have a decision point point to decide whether that offered compensation or proposed compensation is enough. But because it's such a nascent industry, there's no ability to create a policy that would put sufficient guidance to staff to allow board to delegate that authority to staff at this point, and there may never be. We'll see how that all develops. But just that's why this policy is so narrow.
Commissioner Fro.
Thank you. And thank you, Ben, for the presentation. I have just a couple of questions. One is mechanically after, and this is thinking ahead and outside the bounds of the policy being presented, but once the CO2 is injected into the pore and capped, presumably, will there then be ongoing access for monitoring, et cetera?
Yes. Yeah, again, we're, as you stated, and I'll reiterate, we're moving ahead into, the policy is
Right.
authorizing exploration work, but this would come as part of an injection lease.
Right.
Currently, this is governed or regulated by the federal EPA. And so what you're talking about would fall into the requirements of a Class 6 injection well. And Class 6 injection wells are specifically for the permanent sequestration of carbon. And so as part of that process, this is again part of the exploration idea and why the exploration lease authorizes the lessee to begin the permitting process, because we want to understand and want them to be able to bring to us this is what we're going to need as far as access goes. And so then I can bring that to you and say, as part of this lease, we are granting our lessee this type of access for this period of time, including monitoring for this long, or whatever that case may be. And so I can't give you specifics on that, but I can tell you that monitoring post-injection is a key part of the permitting process and planning and the regulation of that activity.
Great, thank you. I know it was outside the bounds. And also, without going down, digressing too far, I'm just curious, even as you've referenced the description generally of this emerging market opportunity, it seems that it relates so much more to mineral ownership than surface ownership. I'm just curious what some of the broader considerations, this is curiosity, not so much influencing our decision, but why it's being tied to surface ownership rather than mineral rights.
I'm going to defer to Ed on this one.
Thank you, Commissioner Fro. I actually appreciate that. It's my opinion, and I don't want to go too deep into legal advice in open session, but it's my legal opinion that question's a little more open about where pore space ownership ends, and there's I also don't want to go into the weeds, but there's interesting discussions about the various aspects of that. But one element that happens often when states start legislating in this area is a declaration of who owns the pore space. And while that hasn't happened in Colorado yet, we anticipate that there will be a legislative declaration that will allocate pore space one side or the other. We think it is more likely that it'll be allocated to a surface ownership than a mineral ownership as a default. It's one of the reasons why the board has, as an entity, has started reserving pore space as part of its mineral reservation, is to make sure that the school trust is reserving that stick in the bundle of property sticks. And it's one of the reasons why the land board as a staff is treating it within its mineral organization. So I hope that answers the question without getting too far in the weeds, but I'm happy to provide a future discussion of that point in executive session, or I see Commissioner or Director, Assistant Director.
You got demoted 3 times.
You almost got promoted twice.
Yeah.
So I would like to highlight, one of the reasons we think we're well positioned right now to participate in business is we own large blocks of land where we own both the surface and minerals. So no matter where in the end it comes down, we are looking at lands today where we own both. And so if it swings one way or another, we're still fine with the projects we're doing today. And a lot of other landowners are in that position. So that's why we're trying to move quickly and participate early.
Yes.
As Commissioner Pro went outside the bounds, if I could do the same thing. I'm just curious, as you are our potential clients that are doing exploratory, as you evaluate our land, this floor space, are you determining, yeah, this works for carbon, maybe this would work for water, because this state, we need to start putting water in, or are they the same type of land?
Totally different depths. So
Yeah.
to his earlier point, water storage is happening, in the top 1,000 feet.
But I
Carbon
don't think we
storage.
would ever do both operations at the same, on the same 100 acres or 1,000.
I wouldn't rule it out.
Okay. I'm just curious, that's where,
Yeah.
I mean, there's so much conversation in our state on putting water in aquifers.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. I think I guess 2 things on that. One, to reiterate Greg's point, and secondarily, there's a component of this around the Clean Water Act, the Federal Clean Water Act, that is part of that permitting process, right? That I can't remember exactly how it's defined, but basically you cannot, under that act, you can't, in broad terms, you can't contaminate potential sources of drinking water. Right? And so I think we'd be looking at something like that. To date, we've not received any proposals that seem like they're anywhere near a drinking water source, or even a place you could store it, simply because of the depths that we're talking about. But I take your point that that's something we should be cognizant of going forward and say, how does this affect our water? And one of the wonderful things that we now have is this water manager who receives our is one of the business line managers that now receives our, hey, I've got an application for this type of use, and sends folks like me back very interesting and compelling questions like, how is this going to affect water on the property and things like that.
And I just think at some point in the future is, we need more storage in this state. And I think as just keep it in the back of your mind, oh, this would be great to put 1 million acre feet of water. Because those questions will be asked at some point in the future, looking for land that can accommodate that.
Thank you.
All right, any further conversation to be had?
Commissioner Froben still has her hand up. Hasn't been.
Commissioner Frobe?
Nope, took it down.
Okay, all right. We will open this to public comment. Again, none in the room. We'll open online.
Member of the public, if you'd like to make a comment on this item, use the raise hand feature. No raised hands, Commissioner.
Okay. Need a motion.
As long as what's on the screen is, because I
It
don't
is.
have it up here
It
right now.
is.
So I move to, no, I want to see the whole. I like to see what the-
He did an addition though on the screen with that addition of 0.2B.
Oh, yeah, I just wanted to read this. But it's going to be that.
You got it.
Yes. I move to approve the geologic carbon sequestration leasing policy 300-011 as presented in the presentation today and in the PowerPoint.
Thank you. Commissioner Clark, do we have a second?
Yes, Commissioner Thompson, second.
Wonderful. We'll call a vote. Commissioner Heath,
Aye.
Commissioner Chavez.
Yes.
Commissioner Clark,
Aye.
Commissioner Pro.
Yes.
I just heard the S.
That's a yes.
Yes.
Yay. All
The
right.
S of yes.
And the chair votes yes, that passes 5-0. I appreciate the step we're taking down this path, so thank you.
Appreciate the approval. Thank you. It's just having to educate us. So.
Exactly, well,
It's a new every day.
Those that keeps coming back and we continue.
that's why it's good,
Continue
these
to
are,
learn and
Yeah.
I appreciate the questions.
these are indeed living policies.
Yes.
All right, Jared will walk us through the Colorado State Forest Annual Work Plan.
And if you'll just give me 30 seconds to get Jared brought up.
Okay.
And we're keeping our fingers crossed that technology will work for us.
Oh, no, I have it all. I just wasn't on the page yet. Thanks.
All right, good morning, commissioners. Can you hear me?
Yes, morning.
Okay, so you can hear and see me. See if I can get my PowerPoint up.
Mine's work, it's
working.
Yeah.
But sometimes you click tabs. It doesn't necessarily go.
You did it.
Yep,
Good work.
we can see it.
Oh,
Now we can.
Okay, all right. Is it still coming up?
Yes.
Perfect.
Oh.
All right, good morning, commissioners. I'm Jared Smith, Northwest District Manager. I am here to present the Colorado State Forest 2023 annual work plans for your review. Okay, so just to start off, why is this important? The review of these annual work plans, it's really a joint effort between the stakeholders and the lessees on the Colorado State Forest property. Without this process, it would be difficult to know what's going on the property between lessees and the State Land Board and the public as well. So the Colorado State Forest, this property is the large piece that borders Larimer County. It's in the eastern edge of Jackson County in the northwest corner. This is, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
I thought I heard something. The property size, it's just over 70,000 acres. It runs from the north end of Jackson County down to the south end where Cameron Pass is. As mentioned before, there are multiple grazing lessees on this property. There's grazers. There are recreation through Colorado Parks and Wildlife, which leases the property for the State Forest State Park. The Colorado State Forest Service also leases the property for timber management. And so on the map that I have up, as you can see, the very north end of the property, there is the Sherman Creek Ranch headquarters that's signified by the purple. The Sherman Creek Ranch lessee, they also lease portions of the state forest for their grazing operation. The North Sand Hills, if anyone remembers that area, it's on the very, very northern end of the state forest. Moving south on the southern end is the Moose Visitor Center, which is right off of Highway 14. Also the KOA, the old KOA campground, which is now being revamped by Parks and Wildlife, is also right off of Highway 14 in the southern end of the property. So the annual work plan's goal, we really do try to accomplish three things. We are trying to coordinate projects across individual lessees' efforts. Every group and stakeholder has different things going on the property, and we always try to coordinate and join forces if there's projects that make sense to do so. And that is the plan collaboratively across lessees efforts. The final part of the process is for the board to review these plans and approve them as well. It also gives the public an opportunity to comment on these plans. This process was developed into essentially a 4-step process in the mid-90s. Again, the development process begins with the agencies submitting annual work plans, as well as the lessees. So typically that includes Jackson County, all of our lessees that are on the property, as well as the state land board. The state land board then compiles these work plans, distributes the plans to all of the stakeholders and lessees for them to review and to comment on. The groups then get together in what we call the working group and review the plans in person or over the phone. We always essentially cover the larger projects that have been accomplished, any projects that are being planned for the upcoming year. And then if any of the groups have questions or comments, that's when those are presented. And then finally, after the working group has completed their review, the final draft is passed through the board to review and approve as well. So looking at the past year's accomplishments, we have a lot of things that are completed every year, and we just want to highlight a few things every year just to show kind of the variety of projects that are being worked on and completed on the state forest. So the Colorado Parks and Wildlife Parks Division, they've completed a conversion of an old logging road on the park to allow for OHV use. And with the expansion of OHV and side-by-side use across the state, this provides the public access to an area that was otherwise only accessible on foot or horseback. The Colorado State Forest Service has multiple timber sales that are either active or being finished every year on the state forest. The notable one is called the Up There Timber Sale, which is on the very north end of the park or the state forest. It also, the timber contractor in turn, as well as collecting and completing their timber sale, also did work on a county road that provides access through the park. So there was kind of a dual benefit of the timber management as well as increased access from the county road. And then finally, the most commissioners this past year did a tour of the state forest. And if you all remember, the KOA, the old KOA North Park Campgrounds area that Colorado Parks and Wildlife is working on, they'd just installed kind of a new entrance sign for the state park. And this includes updated logos for the agencies. And it's a good kind of spot for the public to see this sign when they're entering the state park. Previously, when park visitors were entering the state forest, they would see the KOA signs and the buildings, and so it was kind of confusing that the kind of the main entrance to the state park would have a kind of a private operator at the entrance. So here's a good photo of that entrance sign, and we were very supportive of this being installed. So looking forward for the 2023 work plans focus, as I mentioned earlier, the North Sandhills up in the northern end of the state forest, there is constant recreation use in that area that spills over from the BLM onto the state forest. The state land board has in the past and continues to work with the BLM, the state park staff, and the U.S. Forest Service, as well as Jackson County, to help manage that recreation in the area to help limit resource damage and trespass use in that area. And so this management does include a memorandum of understanding between all agencies in that area. It helps us where we are planning on developing designated camping areas to help limit the public camping that's occurring wherever they can find a flat spot. So mentioned earlier, the North Park Campground, this is the area that CPW is working on revamping, which was the old KOA site. There are a lot of moving parts on that property, and the CPW has done a lot of great work. They're hoping to have portions of that area open for public use by the fall, but they are working on a few redirections that have come up with any construction project. So the electrical, the plumbing, that's always that's been an issue up there, and CPW is ensuring that all of that infrastructure meets state standards and is safe and usable by the public. And we're looking forward to that finished product. Finally, timber health and fire mitigation. This is again an ongoing use on the property, and Forest Service has done a great job at conducting timber sales, doing thinning, and making sure that the state forest is the timber is being well looked after. The State Forest Service has just recently signed on to a project with Fort Collins. So the city of Fort Collins has the Michigan River Ditch, which crosses the southern end of the property, and they're concerned with any kind of wildfire in that area that would cause extensive damage to their water supply. And so the State Forest Service is planning some thinning, and to just ensure that if there is a fire in that area, it's mosaicked and it's not intensive to where it would cause damage to the water in the ditch in that southern area of the property. So as I mentioned, I just went over a few highlights. The packet of all of the work plans have been passed to the board. It's included in the packet. So the staff recommends the board approve the Colorado State Annual Work Plans for 2023. Are there any questions or comments from the board?
Any commissioner comments? I don't see Deb.
No hand for Commissioner Frobe.
Okay. All right, thanks, Jared. Any public questions? We want to go ahead and open it up to public comment. As
The public, if you'd like to engage with the board on this item, use the raise hand feature. No raised hands, Commissioner.
Okay, very good. With that, we will need a motion.
I move to approve the Colorado State Forest Annual Work Plans for 2023 presented in our packet.
Second that.
We have a motion, Commissioner Clark, second Commissioner Heath. We'll call a vote. Commissioner Heath.
Aye.
Commissioner Chavez. Yes. Commissioner Clark.
Aye.
Commissioner Frobe.
Yes. Yes.
We got it again.
And the chair votes yes. That motion passes 5-0. Yes, Assistant Director of Fish.
I would like to ask the commissioners to remember this moment. Because we may come back later this year. This whole process is a legacy from the 90s.
Yeah.
There was a lot of public attention on the State Forest State Park and what we were doing there. We advertise, I don't know if Jared mentioned it, all of this gets advertised in the local papers. I think, Jared, did you tell me it's been 9 years since we got a public comment?
Yeah, the last time we received comment.
So we are thinking about coming back to you later this year and suggesting that we no longer require this to come to the board, that staff continue to go through the process. The process is great. We're coordinating a lot of activity on the forest, but that either Director Ryan or myself have authority to approve the plans, and that you don't, if you don't choose to spend time on this going forward. So I just want you to remember what this looked like.
I think the analogy I would make is Lowry, we've got 20 lessees out there and we have an annual lessee meeting that's run by staff and all the coordination occurs and it doesn't need to come here for approval. And
Yeah.
I think we've found after 25 years up there that they've stopped paying attention and we've built a process that's a little more unwieldy than it needs to be now.
All right, very good. Thank you, Jared.
Thank you.
All right. Announce, yeah, we can announce again that the item E, the ground lease for the gas-powered electricity generation facility again has been pulled. So we are moving onward to our board leasing agenda. Welcome.
Thank you. Good morning, commissioners. Andy Bissett, Transactions and Record Services Manager. We've got quite a full board leasing agenda. Your review and approval this month. 13 items total, broken down into 9 bids, 6 of which are ag and 3 of which are rec. 2 new leases, 1 ag, 1 rec. And then we also have 2 ecosystem services extensions. If the board has any questions, staff can help answer those. But with that, the staff recommends approval of the April 2023 board leasing agenda.
This is Commissioner Cox. I have 2 questions. One, on number 5, I think that acres is wrong, or the value of the lease is wrong. 631.5 acres for $585,000. So I was just curious about that.
That one is, let's see, agriculture is grazing, dry crop, and irrigated. So the dollar amounts are factoring in the rates of all 3 of those. So the irrigated crop share is probably where, you're seeing a difference.
Higher value.
Yeah.
And it's a 10-year lease.
Okay.
So it's 50.
Oh, 15. Okay, that makes sense. And I was just curious there was a couple of them that where an auction was held. How was that done? This Wilbur, I guess, is that Wilbur? No, that's, they just.
Which, I don't have it in front of me. These are rec auctions.
Yes.
So when we get multiple, this is Greg Oakers, Assistant Director, when we get multiple applications for a recreation use, we then schedule what we call a step auction. It can be in person or it can be over the phone. It's held in one of the district offices and our recreation program manager, Abe Medina, will attend. And they simply start the bidding at a number, establish a minimum amount for increases and circle around the table, letting the applicants bid until everybody but one, everybody stops. And then that party is awarded the lease.
Thank you.
We use that in some other places, but that's what it looks like.
Thank you. Any further commissioner questions or comments before I go to public? I don't believe so, and I don't see in the room. I know I catch you every time you're taking a bite.
A lot of bites.
Yeah, we'll open up to public comment.
Members of the public, use that raise hand feature. No raised hands, Commissioner.
Okay, we could have a motion.
Do you want this one?
I'm ready, but I move adoption of the board leasing agenda for April 2023.
Thank you, Commissioner Heath, and a second.
Commissioner Chavez, a second.
Wonderful. Let's call a vote. Commissioner Heath.
Aye.
Commissioner Chavez.
Yes.
Commissioner Clark.
Aye.
Commissioner Pro.
Yes, yes.
Yes, yes, and the chair votes yes. That motion passes 5-0. Thank you, Andy. All right, we are on to our board minutes. Any changes that Commissioner saw in the minutes? All right, seeing no comment with that, the minutes pass by acclamation and I believe that is all. Any closing comments?
I can tell you all a little bit about May and June.
Wonderful.
Staff's listening, so I'm sure I'll get it wrong.
Let me pull up my calendar. Okay.
The meeting is May 10th and 11th. On the 10th, Justin Beery has arranged a tour of water-related assets that basically starts at Lowry and winds its way up and ends in Sterling.
We'll start here at this building. First stop would be, yes.
But involves some CWCD presentations, some viewing of specific pieces of water infrastructure. So a thoughtful discussion of a lot of parts of the water business on a tour with multiple stops that ends in Sterling.
Dovetailing with a review and discussion the next day of the water business plan update. And we've never had a water leasing policy before, so we're developing that for your.
So are we staying overnight in Sterling?
Yes.
So we're overnight in Sterling?
Yes.
On the 10th.
Okay.
The night of the 10th. Yes. For June, we'll get the specific dates. June is the 14th and 15th. Commissioner Clark, I know you're out of town. We are going to go down to Pueblo and see the ribbon cutting for the Thunderwolf Solar Facility. We believe the governor will be in attendance there, as a lot of other local officials and dignitaries. It's a pretty big deal. Thunderwolf, in fact, somebody told David, I think you told me yesterday, they found a way to add another 48 megawatts. So it's 248 megawatts now, plus 100 megawatts of battery storage. It's a pretty big, cool facility. From there, we'll get a brief tour of it after the ribbon cutting. Then we're going to go to the GCC cement plant. Who's speaking that for us? Ben, I think. So one of our solid mineral leases with the cement processing plant on site there. Big carbon emitter, and there may be discussion of how they're going to capture the carbon, what they're going to do with it. And then the following day, we're going to have a discussion, among other things. There will be a discussion, as I mentioned, about the whole trust and asset allocation, what the various parts of our portfolio earn. And should we be making conscious decisions to move assets from one pie wedge to another pie wedge? So that will be on at the Thursday meeting at June in Pueblo.
And discussion of the solid minerals business plan. I can just.
And discussion of and a discussion of the 2023-24 business plan goals. We drive our business every year with a set of goals that support the strategic plan. So I'll give you the readout on how we did on the last 12 months and tell you what we plan to do for the next 12 months. Okay, so lots of good stuff in the next 2 meetings.
Do you know by chance where location only, where we might be in July? Here, okay, July is in July.
Hang on. Time out, we're in Crystal Mill. We moved going down to July.
I think we were staying here. We were starting, I believe we're starting here going up.
Let's talk to the person who actually does all of the business for us. Where are we staying in July?
It will be, the meeting will be out of Denver, but we will be starting our tour from the Denver office and finishing back here.
Going up to Greeley, we're gonna see a pad site, we're gonna stop at the Noble Operations Center.
And then we're gonna come back.
And then we'll see the oil and gas business plan.
So in July, we'll be up in Greeley?
We're gonna be,
For the day.
Just for the day.
Denver.
yeah, but we'll be,
Up to Greeley.
I know what the topic is, I just didn't know where we're staying.
To go to Greeley.
okay, that, yeah, location is helpful.
We'll meet here at around like 8 or 8:30.
Okay.
Call up a speaker and then go.
I don't think so, because we.
And then come back.
And then come back. Yep. Be back around 4.
So let's talk about the
So
logistics
we
of
have to
that
come
since we have
across
two
it, that's
commissioners
it.
that
I
are
mean,
along the way already.
We'll see.
you're right, it's coming. It's all-
So I knew what the theme was. I just didn't know the logistics of the day.
Okay,
To the extent that you are in Boulder and we're going to really, let's figure out how to work that in.
Yeah.
Bill, we're gonna have a meeting, they're gonna have us, we're gonna have a speaker here in the morning before we go
Oh, okay.
up the road.
Okay. I'm sorry, I'm not always up to date on the details. I just have a broad theme.
So the one in Pueblo, which is in June, right?
Yes,
So we're going down the night before, is that right?
we will. We're starting the day here
from here.
because we don't need to be at Thunder Wolf until 10. That's correct.
In June?
On June 14th, we'll start our morning here
Stay in
Well, I
Pueblo.
could go to, I could leave.
and you can just meet us there.
Okay, so not in Pueblo, we'll start here. Okay.
Right, and then we'll spend that night in Pueblo, the 14th.
How about we send an email and all these?
Yeah. That'd be helpful. That'd be helpful. And even if you know, if you know location at all through the summer, that's great. So I can schedule accordingly.
Also, don't.
Okay, yeah, that's. We have to have green chili in Pueblo. I just want to put that out there.
Sloppers.
Yes, exactly. All right, are we all good? Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all.
Appreciate it. Have a great day. No.
Thank you.
Remember, right, I'm gonna take out the lunch, and then I just looked it up and it said permanently closed. I did not know that restaurant was permanently.
Oh, where were you going?
Parsley, down 11th. Yeah, across from Metropolis Coffee there.
But if you want to meet on that same street,